I'll obviously be talking about that till 1 o'clock. Then this growing story, this outrage that's been directed at Jess Phillips,
yes,
understandably, the so-called Equalities and Safeguarding Minister, that sees no reason at all why there should be a government inquiry into the outrage, the atrocity of these grooming gangs that have existed in the UK for decades.
Well, and of course Elon Musk saying she needs to go to prison. I mean, obviously wading in as well. It's going to be a very busy show. Very nice to see you, and I wish you a very happy New Year. Thank you very much for your company this morning. I'm not here tomorrow. Back for Weekend Breakfast starting at 6 on Saturday.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
Time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. Shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public is not being told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome to the show. I am Russell Quirk. I'm here until 1 o'clock. Lots coming up, lots to discuss. Lots of breaking news, of course, overnight, including, as you just heard, from David Bull, developing story in both Las Vegas with regard to this Cybertruck explosion and also possible links between that and the New Orleans outrage, the seeming terrorist attack there where a rented truck has driven into crowds of people, very reminiscent, of course, of the other recent atrocity in a similar vein in Germany at the Christmas market. And yesterday, overnight, the atrocity in New Orleans has killed 15 people. So we will be talking about that, of course, over the next 3 hours. And yes, authorities investigating a possible connection between the man and the driver of a Tesla Cybertruck, the truck that exploded in Vegas. In particular, news seemingly that they both used the same ride-share car-sharing app, which, yes, I'm sure the authorities in the United States are busy joining the dots on. Also, anyone suspected of being involved in people smuggling or other serious crime will face bans on travel, internet use, mobile phone use and social media. This is a big expansion, apparently, of court orders from Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer. This is new news this morning, all designed to crack down on small boat crossings. And, of course, you will be familiar with this phrase, to smash the gangs. However, in my view, as we will discuss over the next 3 hours, it's all a bit of a damp squib, isn't it? It's all a bit pathetic, quite embarrassing, I think, really, that Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer think that depriving people smuggling gangs in Albania and Turkey of TikTok somehow is going to bring down illegal immigration. Pathetic is how I would term it. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Of course, you can text me as usual on the usual text number 87222 with the word talk placed before your message, or indeed you can leave a WhatsApp message on 0344 499 1000 as a voice note, and obviously we will endeavour to read those out. Also coming up, police have apparently abandoned 4 unsolved crimes every minute last year. Officers failed to identify a suspect in more than half of robberies, 6 in 10 criminal damage cases and arson cases, and 7 in 10 thefts and burglaries, so say figures from the Home Office. Pretty outrageous, I think, in terms of the lack of ability on the part of our police force. Bearing in mind, we now have more police officers in Britain than ever before. What on earth are they doing? 147,000 police officers. I hardly ever see one, by the way, unless they've got blue lights on and they're going to an incident. Let me know what you think. What is wrong with our police? 0344 499 1000. And talking of police forces, yes, no wonder they aren't focusing on solving crimes. No wonder their detection rate is reducing at an alarming rate, as I've just referenced. Police forces, 11 of them, by the way, are now allowing transgender officers to carry multiple warrant cards for their different gender identities. So if you decide that one day you're a male, that's one warrant card. The next day, if you fancy being female, that's a second warrant card in your wallet. It's like a pack of cards. Because, of course, according to some lunatics, there are up to 500 different genders. I mean, that's a lot of warrant cards to carry around with you as a police officer. No wonder they can't run after criminals. They're weighed down with plastic, seemingly, in terms of the weight of their warrant cards. I kid you not, this is not April the 1st. This is a true representation of 11 British police forces that think it is acceptable and a good use of time, money and resources to allow their transgender officers to carry around with them multiple warrant cards. It is ridiculous and pathetic. Funny if it wasn't quite so alarming. So coming up, lots and lots of guests between now and 1 o'clock, including Dame Andrea Jenkins. She'll be with me just after 10:30. Ross Clark, who is going to be talking to me about the problem of hybrid cars and electric vehicles. We've also got Jonathan Haslam, Ivan Sampson, who will be talking about the people smuggling story that I've just discussed, and Yvette Cooper's fantastically effective, I'm sure, attempt to smash the gangs by depriving them of Twitter and Facebook. I kid you not. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Be great to hear from you. This is your show. This is your channel. Yes, would love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 or text the word talk 87222 plus your message. And joining me, I'm delighted to say, and actually, sadly, appropriately for the next 3 hours, is Philip Ingram, MBE. We are literally honoured.
Thank you very much indeed.
So, Philip Ingram, a former senior military intelligence officer, it is fortuitous, I'm afraid, that you are here with us today, given the news overnight in the United States in particular. Not one but 2 attacks, terrorist attacks in inverted commas. They haven't been officially designated as such. Although some confusion overnight, as you may have seen, Philip, with initially the mayor of New Orleans saying that the truck attack that's killed 15 revellers in one of the busiest streets, party streets in America, was terrorism. Then, of course, the FBI representative a few hours later said it was not, and now the FBI now saying it probably was. What on earth is going on there? If we can't get the categorisation right, there's no hope, is there?
Well, it wasn't a few hours later, it was a few minutes later. It was the same briefing. So it went from the mayor to the chief of police, who didn't declare it one way or the other, and then the FBI, who are taking over from the police, as they do when you've got a federal issue, and she said it wasn't. I think that was a slip of the tongue. And whenever you've got...
It's quite a slip of the tongue.
It is quite a slip of the tongue. And she seemed quite junior, even though she was
Why put her up?
The only person that's available. At that time, we were talking of a couple of hours after the event.
Isn't it better to say nothing rather than say something that is very ill-advised indeed?
Oh, very much so. But an awful lot of our public figures are not properly trained, and in the United States, properly trained in how to deal with the press. They should be, but in the heat of the moment, her priorities were not necessarily getting her words right. Her priorities were trying to secure the environment, make sure that there weren't additional threats around, try and bring all of the different agencies, because in America there are so many different agencies get involved.
Well, I guess, but my concern is obviously going back to what happened here back in the UK in terms of the Southport inspired unrest. A lot of that was because of seemingly lack of information, an alleged withholding of information, and yet what we saw in the United States yesterday, when we saw the first pictures of the truck that had gone into that crowd and injured multiple people and killed 15 people, was the fact that it seems, and obviously that this will all be confirmed, I'm sure, as the hours and the days go on, so we have to tread slightly carefully, I think, in terms of what is fact and what is not. However, what does seem to be the case, despite the confusion amongst the authorities with regard to whether this was, or indeed being investigated as a terrorist attack, was the fact that the ISIS flag that now is confirmed by the FBI as having been found on that truck it looks like it was covered up.
There's some speculation as to whether it was flying on that pole at the back of the truck that
there was a jacket.
There was a jacket over that.
It'd be an odd place to put a jacket.
The actual wording of the FBI report that I checked just before we came on air said it was found in the back of the truck. So there's a lot of speculation around, and this is part of the problem. This is why it's better if the authorities don't label in a public domain until they're certain, because it creates uncertainty. The labels are important when it comes to dealing with and getting access to resources. So as soon as it's declared as terrorism, it'll go from a local New Orleans thing to an FBI, it'll go to a national thing. And the same in the UK. If an incident happens, it goes from being a local police issue to a national counter-terrorism police issue. That with that automatically brings a huge amount of resources that allows you to try and deal with the issues as quickly as possible and identify if there are any additional threats and keep the public as safe as possible. Sometimes it's better to label something as potentially terrorist and get access to those resources and then prove it's not, than not to label it and try and go the other way.
But I guess we can understand the speculation on both sides of the Atlantic, given given what's happened here with regard to Southport, given what's happened recently in Germany in terms of the attack on that Christmas market, and it would seem that from the point of view of the public, that certain things are muted or dumbed down or indeed covered up. Now, I kind of understand the kind of the inference by the authorities not to allow too much incorrect speculation. But the problem is when it comes then to seemingly almost kind of eradicating evidence of, let's tell it how it is, any Islamist activity, that then immediately triggers the public, particularly the conspiracy theorists, with regard to the fact that this is clearly something that is Islamist, and I think that's pretty clear from the fact that this particular individual, Shamsuddin Jabbar, despite the fact that he's homegrown, he was born in Texas, despite the fact that he was a US citizen, despite the fact that he served in the army, he was clearly radicalised. Yep. We know that already. And the ISIS flag and the evidence that ISIS flag was in place kind of confirms that. I guess we can understand why the public might be concerned that there is an attempt to kind of collude to stop not just speculation, but the truth immediately coming out with regard to the motives of these particular attackers.
Yeah, but the bottom line is, for the general public, if someone said it was Islamist or it was extreme right wing or something else, they'll go, oh, there's a label, right? Is that going to change what's happened on the ground? No. People have died, people have been injured, and there's the potential for more. So for those authorities that are on the ground, it's dealing with the immediate casualties. It's trying to ensure you've got all of the perpetrators so that you're keeping the public safe, and it's trying to look for any connections to see if this is someone, as we talk about, as a lone wolf, or whether there are others that could come in. Those are the priorities. Then putting a label on it to try and work out what motivated the individual and all the rest of it is a slightly longer term issue. So people get, because of what we get in social media and put over these things all the time, people want to speculate, and you get so many uninformed individuals out there trying to put labels on things.
But the authorities do have form. I mean, we're going to talk later on.
Oh, yes, very much so.
In a few minutes, we're going to talk about grooming gangs and the fact that very, very clearly the activities of grooming gangs in Britain were covered up by the police and by local authorities. And seemingly, again, on the basis of not, inverted commas, inciting racial tensions. Well, look, I'm sorry, that simply isn't good enough. It also then fuels speculation that whenever there is a potential Islamist element to something, that the authorities might also then be trying to quell such speculation because they don't want racial incitement. I would suggest, actually, to the authorities that if there is an Islamist angle, that it is put out there for all to know and understand, frankly, so that we can understand what the issue is and then clearly do something about it. As I say, I don't want to go too far into the grooming gang thing until after the break, but it is very, very clear that covering up grooming gang activity, the same as if potentially the activities of Islamism in terms of terrorism were being covered up, all it does is enable further incidents.
You've hit the nail on the head. The one thing that the authorities get wrong consistently is being proactive in getting messaging out. And you're being clear in what they're doing. That one press conference where the mayor said terrorist and the head of the FBI said it wasn't terrorist, and then it came out a few hours later that FBI are now dealing with it as a terrorist. That is where they sowed the confusion. So our public bodies need to know how to get control of the information domain. And when it comes into the grooming gangs, I don't think we should call them grooming gangs. They're child rapists.
They are.
Grooming is too gentle a word. These are rapists and abusers and
paedophiles.
And paedophiles. They should be talked about as such. My dog gets groomed.
Yep, indeed. More of this when we come back after the break. 0344 499 1000. Please get involved. There's lots to talk about today. I'm sure you will have a view and an opinion on what's happened in the US and indeed on what we're about to talk about after the break, Philip and I, with regard to the outrage, the atrocity, and it's still going on, by the way, that is grooming gangs. Yes, Philip's right, rape gangs in Britain. This is Talk. I'm Russell Quirk. Back after this.
Well, I think we should be concerned about the threat posed by Islamist terror attacks. We have seen a number of Islamist attacks over recent years happen on UK soil. Of course, many, many more have been foiled by counter-terrorism policing and the security services, besides those that have tragically taken place. So I think all of us should do everything we can to support CT policing and the security services.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk here till 1 o'clock. I'm joined by Philip Ingram as well. He's here with me all the way through till 1. So, yes, we have just discussed the events overnight with regard to the seeming terrorist attacks, 2 of them in the United States, potentially, one in New Orleans and, of course, one in Las Vegas outside a Trump hotel. That's not a coincidence, is it? I'm sure. But let's turn to another unsavoury subject, I'm afraid, and that is grooming gangs, whereas Philip Ingram has correctly and justifiably characterised them just now on this station, rape gangs. Let's tell it how it is. That is what they are. Grooming gangs, rape gangs that for decades have been predatory towards largely white young girls. When I say young girls, I mean girls of the age of 12, 13, 14 and 15, underage girls that have been groomed, duped, plied with alcohol and raped repeatedly, hundreds if not thousands of them, by grooming gangs, rape gangs that are, and again I'm going to tell it how it is, predominantly of Pakistani men as a demographic. Now, the reason this has popped up again today is because Oldham Council, Labour Oldham Council, having lost control of that council largely because of their attitude and their inaction with regard to these incidents, these decades of wrongdoing in Oldham. And let's also be clear that these particular incidents have been predominant in the likes of Telford, Rochdale, Rotherham, and all over the country. And may I just add, not just historically. This is something that right now is still going on. Something that our authorities, whether it be police at a senior level or local authorities at district and county and metropolitan level, have turned a blind eye to. Why have they turned a blind eye to it? Because, massive inverted commas here, the authorities, potentially also influenced by even more senior politicians, potentially at government level, by way of my speculation, have suggested that to prosecute these rapists would incite racial tension. And let's just think again about those 12, 13 and 14-year-old girls that have been raped and abused multiple times. Do you think that these individuals in power have blood on their hands? Because they absolutely have, surely. They are complicit. Somebody else that I think has not aided the debate, of course, is Jess Phillips. Now, Jess Phillips, MP for Yardley, is the so-called Equalities and Safeguarding Minister. Take a look at what she said when she was in opposition with regard to her attitude towards grooming and rape gangs.
Actual reality of what is happening in government currently is a sticking plaster, announceable thing like the grooming task force. We're a year on from the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. Years and years worth of evidence. And a year on, not a single one of the recommendations. The government have said they'll take some of them. There's no timeline for when any of those recommendations are going to happen, and that's both about prevention and supporting of victims who have been victims of sexual violence in childhood.
So you would imagine now that Jess Phillips is part of the government. She is an Under-Secretary of State. She is a minister. Having been so vocal in opposition with regard to these gangs, these appalling actions, crimes and atrocities by largely Pakistani grooming and rape gangs towards largely white young girls, you would imagine that Jess Phillips, as part of the government now, would be extremely supportive of, for instance, the newly constituted Oldham Council that in May resolved that they, by huge majority at a council meeting, wanted to see a government inquiry into the whole subject of these gangs across the country. Jess Phillips, now in government, has responded, late by the way, after being chased several times it seems, by way of a letter back to Oldham Council based on their request to say no, there will be no government inquiry. So it does seem rather an about turn, rather a flip-flop, doesn't it? That Jess Phillips, when in opposition, and this is rather familiar now, I think, when it comes to this government, when in opposition, they were writing out cheques that I'm afraid, in government, they are now refusing to cash. This is absolutely disgraceful, not just on the part of Jess Phillips, but also on the part of those that have been complicit and effectively have enabled these atrocities, these assaults, these rapes, these crimes to go on for decades and decades and decades. These people should be held to account. In fact, Elon Musk has said in a tweet overnight, he says Jess Phillips should be in prison. That's what Elon Musk thinks. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. Somebody that has called that number and wants to talk about Jess Phillips is Barry in Norwich. Barry, thank you very much indeed for calling Talk.
Good morning. Yeah, a quick comment on this Jess Phillips and then a very quick one on the boat, if that's okay.
Sure.
Jess Phillips, what an absolute disgrace. I could not quite believe what I heard this morning. An absolute disgrace. These Pakistani Indian paedophiles have raped, groomed and took away children's childhoods that are going to be with them for the rest of their lives. Now, having been in the care system myself in the 70s and 80s, yeah, right, I can speak from experience, not that, but other stuff. Until police officers, social workers, teachers are put in the dock and sent to prison, this will carry on because these people are never, ever held to account. Ever.
Barry, isn't it outrageous that across, I mean, tens of thousands of incidents, we think that there are, you know, upwards of 1,000, maybe 2,000 young girls that have been victims of this abuse across the country, abused multiple times. And of course, look, there have been several dozen perpetrators that have actually been charged, taken through the judicial system and convicted, but nowhere near as many as should have been.
We need police officers because they were complicit in it.
Well, but that was going to be my question. So how on earth have council officers, council leaders potentially, across the likes of Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, Oldham and so on, and senior police officers that have actually not just turned a blind eye here. This is not just, you know, turning their backs and ignoring the problem. This is being complicit by way of directing that these incidents are not investigated and the criminals themselves are not brought to task. Why do you think it is that hasn't happened?
I'll tell you why. Because the police investigate themselves with the IPCC and local councils investigate themselves. Until you get someone who's proper independent from the police and who's proper independent from the council, yeah, right, this will carry on and carry on and carry on because all we ever hear is, well, we'll learn by his mistakes and all that rubbish. These people who've done that, when they were sent to prison, they should be booted out of the country and gone. Yeah, right.
Well, we're assuming that they weren't born here. I mean, obviously, some of these paedophiles, some of these attackers, these criminals, some of them were born in Britain. I mean, they're not all immigrants to this country. Some of them were. So obviously, you can't boot out someone that's a British citizen. But I take the point.
Right. And another quick one on these boats and Keir Starmer and smashing the gangs. He doesn't need to smash the gangs. What he needs to do is stop giving these people legal aid so they can claim their case in this country, stop giving them hotels, stop giving them 55 quid a week, stop giving them free bed and breakfast, stop giving them free electricity, gas and water, free clothes and mobile phones, and then perhaps they might lose the incentive to come over here.
Yeah.
And then perhaps we might get a grasp on what's going on, because there's a lot of undercover stuff going on with these grooming gangs. There's a lot more than that happening, and I think it's an absolute disgrace, and I'm glad you call that out for what it is. It's not child porn.
We are probably the only channel that is telling it how it is.
God.
But if Barry from Norwich can solve this problem, two problems. One, the problem of illegal migration, and also rail, as you just had very eloquently, with regard to those in authority that have failed to act. Why can't our leaders, why can't our politicians, Barry? You think there's a cover-up?
Because they're scared of racism until we actually... Look, I'm going to be straight to the point. This has really made me angry. Until we stop putting the minority before the majority, these children, these young girls are much more important than someone's religion, much more important than someone's skin colour. They are our citizens, they are our future, and they are now going around living a nightmare, and they'll live that day after day after day after the rest of their lives. And all these people who've done that should be... Oh, they should be sent to prison.
Well, they should be prosecuted. Of course they should.
Yeah.
Barry, thank you very much indeed for a very, very eloquent and moving call. Philip Ingram, your take.
Barry's completely right. And why we're getting political interference in police operations, we keep getting told that they're independent of any political direction. And I was only reading a report this morning which said that back in 2008, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, the Home Office sent a note out to the various police forces saying not to investigate because of the potential for the tension.
And just remind us, who was the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time?
It just happened to be one Keir Starmer.
So was he as useless as a DPP as he is as Prime Minister?
Well, I think he showed he was useless as DPP, and I think he's proving he's useless as Prime Minister. But it doesn't stop this grooming that's going across the whole of the country. And for Jess Phillips to turn around in her letter and say, Oldham Council, we're not going to do a government-led inquiry. You can do your own one, which would cost them too much money. They can't afford that.
But also, it wouldn't be as far-reaching, it wouldn't be as powerful. If it's a government inquiry, it has teeth. Something from Oldham Council simply has less teeth. This has been kicked into the long grass. I mean, some might speculate, watching this, Philip, and listening to this, that people are protecting people from prosecution, from culpability, from exposure. Do you buy that?
I definitely buy that, and that's why we're not having a government-led inquiry. And I was only seeing other comments today in social media where underneath some of the horrific descriptions of what these children were put through, individuals were saying, this is happening in my city today. And underneath that, police forces were saying, please contact us on our contact number and all the rest of it. Maybe the police are going to wake up, but it's too little too late.
Well, and the problem is, of course, if you know that there is a culture and an existence of the police and local authorities not investigating such things, then as a young girl or their parent, you are much less likely to report it, because you think, well, I'm going to go through the process, the humiliation of having to talk about what's happened to me, but with probably no successful end in terms of a prosecution. OK, we need to take another break, Philip. Back after this with Dame Andrea Jenkins, former Government Minister and Reform UK's candidate for Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire. So we're going to be talking to her particularly about this wonderful initiative from Yvette Cooper, taking the gangs, the smuggling gangs off TikTok. Problem solved. Back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk, here till 1 o'clock and joined by Philip Ingram, MBE, I'll have you know, until 1 o'clock also as my my wingman. Lots and lots of texts from you, particularly on the subject of Jess Phillips. Jess Phillips, hang your head in shame, by the way. Dee says, Jess Phillips doesn't want to upset the Labour Muslim voter base. I think you have a very good point there, Dee. She has form, of course, when confronted by lots and lots of masked, seemingly Muslim vigilantes in the summer. She sort of made excuses for them, didn't she, if you remember correctly? So I think because of her constituency being very, very Muslim enriched, shall we call it, Yardley and Birmingham, she definitely has a motivation, which is to ensure that she doesn't upset the Muslim community in her backyard in particular. And Dee goes on to say, Labour doesn't care about any people other than those that vote for them. Well, I'm afraid, Dee, that is probably true of all politicians, I'm afraid. Jude says, by refusing to do anything about the rape of our children and women, that in itself is causing racial tension. But that's okay, according to the government, because anyone who objects are called far-right racists at best and jailed at worst. Yes, there's a lot of truth in what Jude says. And Colin says Phillips should be prosecuted for covering up this disgraceful situation to continue. If it had been white rapist gangs, Phillips would be out there shouting for justice. OK, just to clarify, I'm not sure Phillips is necessarily covering anything up, but she is most certainly being, let's just say, apathetic and negligent and not doing what she should do insofar as those particular girls, the victims of these gang rapes. She is certainly not covering herself in glory. We can only speculate why it is that successive senior police officers, council leaders and maybe MPs have indeed decided not to pursue investigations, inquiries and prosecutions. OK, look, let's change gears slightly. Let's speak to Dame Andrea Jenkins, former Government Minister and Reform UK's candidate for Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire. Andrea, can I call you just Andrea? Am I allowed to do that?
Of course, I'm always just Andrea.
I'm surrounded by dames and MBEs. I feel kind of rather wanting. Look, thanks for joining me. I've got to ask you, obviously, as we have been discussing over the last few minutes, what's your view on the Jess Phillips decision not to grant a government inquiry to Oldham Council based on their request? Do you think it's as outrageous as I think it is?
Oh, God, it's disgusting. I mean, especially, look, I've been in Parliament. I was in Parliament for her for 9 years, and all she'd talk about would be helping abused domestic women when she worked for that charity. And it's just hypocrisy. Is it because it's not the right type of people she wants to prosecute? I'm sorry, but it's wrong. Dame
Andrew, sorry, do you mean the wrong colour?
Yeah,
race?
Absolutely, the wrong race, definitely, and that's wrong because to me, under the British law, everybody should be equal. It shouldn't matter about people's background, their religion, the colour of the skin, or what gender they are.
So we know that from admissions by, I think, Greater Manchester Police in the past, that they have admitted that they did not pursue certain criminality with regard to these rape gangs because they didn't want to incite racial tension. Do you think that's still going on? Do you think Jess Phillips is now very much complicit in having exactly the same motives?
I think it looks that way from the outside, doesn't it? And
but politics before victims.
Well, it certainly looks that way. I mean, I tweeted this morning, actually, Russell, because I was on what's it called, Newsnight, a few months ago.
Never heard of it. And does anyone watch Newsnight anymore? It's about 10 minutes long.
And do you know that they was having a go at me about the riots, saying that my views on illegal migration is inciting it. And this particular presenter...
It's such a lazy accusation.
Isn't it, just? But this particular presenter, I found a clip of her, which I tweeted earlier, where she said that the alleged victim of, which is a young girl, who was allegedly raped by a Syrian refugee, she happened to point out on this clip that the young girl was more sexually experienced than a Syrian refugee, and this is what the trouble is. This is the mainstream media are getting away with saying
outrage that there have been people in senior positions saying almost that these young white 14-year-old girls deserved it because of how they acted, because of what they wore.
To me, they're all complicit in covering this up, Russell, and it's wrong.
It is absolutely outrageous. Look, let's change the subject to one that's equally one that sticks in the throat, which is one of illegal immigration, and in particular the fact that 2024, of course, saw a record amount of people arriving on small boats, 36,800 odd, up 25% on the year before. How is Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper's smashing the gangs thing going, do you think?
I mean, look, the Conservative government didn't do great. I mean...
that's why you left, presumably.
No, I mean... Well, let's just start with that first, then I'll go on to the Labour proposal, if that's okay. I mean, I set up a petition 18 months ago with the Conservative Post to leave the ECHR, and we got over 50,000 signatures. And to me, that's the only way to stop these lefty lawyers, of which Starmer's was one himself, wasn't he?
And I've got one on later, Ivan Sampson. He might not call himself a lefty lawyer, but he's on later, presumably with a rather different view to you.
Yes, and trying to stop us deporting people. And so I think that's what we need to do. That's one of the things we need to do. But I mean, Labour's proposals today, it's just ridiculous.
Well, so we just clarify, Angela, let's just clarify what these pointless and rather pathetic headlines, and that's all they are, really. They're designed to grab headlines so that it looks as though on the first proper day back after New Year that this government means business, particularly when it comes to immigration. Because let's not forget, immigration, for many, many people in Britain, is the #1 issue that they have concerns about, and everything else that kind of trickles down from illegal immigration, whether it be socially, culturally, or indeed economically. So what Yvette Cooper, just to remind everybody this morning, has announced today, and I kid you not, again, it's not April the 1st, this is a serious government policy that in order to smash the gangs, I'm getting really tired of that phrase, by the way, in order to smash the gangs, what the government proposed to do is to remove the ability for those suspected of people smuggling to remove mobile phones and laptops from them, to issue certain travel bans, and also, and this is the big one, to remove their ability to be on TikTok, X, and Facebook. I mean, when I first saw this, I genuinely thought it was a parody account that I was seeing on X.
I mean, it's just
pathetic.
Ludicrous. It's ludicrous, absolutely. And I mean, and did you also see in that as well, actually, Russell, that they can do this before people's been prosecuted as well? And I think back to also what happened in the summer when they was the Home Office was tweeting about locking up these people inciting the riots, even before that they was prosecuted. So this is also the further reach of the law under Labour. But I mean, I'll never protect, obviously, these criminals anyway. But are they not looking that people can go to an internet cafe and go on the internet? People can get a burner phone. There's so many things. So how do they think that this is going to work?
Let's be clear, right? So
and how can it be policed?
So there are hundreds and hundreds of these people smuggling gangs. Most of them are not based in the UK. They are in places like...
A lot are in northern France.
Northern France, Turkey, Albania. So we as a country in our judicial system have no jurisdiction over people in those countries whatsoever. So, you know, banning people that might be here from using social media or from having a phone or a laptop, I mean, it doesn't touch the sides. It doesn't scratch the surface in terms of it actually being a remedy. This, I guess, is almost the judicial equivalent of being mauled by a sheep. I mean, it's...
as they used to say in the 80s, fair coat and no knickers, Russell.
It's exactly that. Look, we can use all of these wonderful anecdotes all day long, can't we?
But it's also the knock-on effect, though. I mean... you must have been called it. The amount of time you get called a racist for actually calling out,
every day.
Migration.
Yeah, every day. As soon as you talk about immigration and the problem of immigration, I mean, I'll be talking to Ivan Sampson.
I mean, I had... Sorry, but when I was an MP, I remember asking a question in the chamber where I said, we should not be importing criminals, and I would like the Home Office and the Department of Justice to publish the data of crimes per nationality, because I think this is important.
Well, and they have in other countries, and of course your colleague...
I got booed in the chamber. I've got a clip where I'm booed by the SNP and the Labour Party.
Your colleague Rupert Lowe has been calling for this for months and months. He's been writing to government departments. You too, because it makes sense, doesn't it? And it's not to be racist. It's simply because if there is a particular issue with particular nationalities that come to this country... I mean, Denmark did a study and showed, by way of their data, that there were certain nationalities that had up to an 8 times higher propensity to commit crime in Denmark as, foreign nationals than the domestic population. Somalia, Uganda and so on, they had a higher propensity. Now, if we don't discuss that as a factual issue, how on earth can we remedy the problem if we refuse to talk about the very problem itself? In France,
I agree, Russell.
In France, there was a study done that showed that over 70% of those convicted of rape in Paris were not born in France. Now, it's not racist to talk about the data, the factual reality that in some countries, by way of some nationalities that go to those countries as immigrants, there is a problem. It might be a problem of poverty. It might be a problem of cultural differences. We all know.
Can I come in on these points, Russell?
Please.
Yeah. I also held a Westminster Hall debate on the true costs of illegal migration, because, it's not only crime levels, is it? It's housing. If we look at Boston in Lincolnshire, do you know that 24% of their social housing tenants are not from the UK? So it affects everything. And I held this debate in Westminster Hall, and only 6 MPs, including myself, turned up to this debate, this important debate which the whole country is talking about illegal migration, and no one from the Labour Party turned up. I think this just demonstrates what the Labour Party is going to do in government with this. They're not going to do anything.
Well, and they're demonstrating that by their apathy. The fact that the Labour government have been in power for 6 months, and we would have expected to see some difference in the migration numbers. We certainly would have expected, given the run-up to the election where Keir Starmer trumpeted the whole smashing the gangs thing time and time again, we would have seen some examples of that, surely, in 6 months, if it was going to work. And look, tell us what reform would do differently, Andrea.
Well, we're finalising the policies at the moment because we're still 4 years away from election. But, I can tell you what I would do. Okay. I would come out the ECHR and, I think we need to turn them back. I don't care about the international law. I'm sorry regarding turning people back in our oceans. I would turn them back personally because, and yes, we've got to tackle the grooming gangs. That's for certain. But we've got to stop being prosecuted for protecting our borders. And so that's the most important thing here.
And removing the incentives. As we talked about on this channel a lot.
Oh, we're soft touch Britain, aren't we?
There is still a Home Office website evident online which clearly says, and it is entitled, here are the words, "This is what you get as an asylum seeker." It is an open invitation, an incentive, a handout to anybody that wants to come here for free stuff to come and do exactly that. Dame Andrea Jenkins, thank you very much indeed. Wise words as ever. So Dame Andrea Jenkins, former government minister and Reform UK's candidate for Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire. We will be back after this break. We're going to be talking about the futility that is EV and hybrid cars. What a waste of time they are.
All these events is to wait and to discover much more about them than we could possibly know at this stage. To rule nothing out, of course, it is perfectly possible that the events are linked and that there is some terrorist element, but it's also possible that they're not, and that there might be some other reason involved. I'm very reluctant to get involved in any speculation about what this is about until we know a great deal more about the perpetrators and about the background.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. It's 10 to 11. I'm here till 1 o'clock. Let's talk about another subject that is sure to irritate. And if it does, do let me know. 0344 499 1000, or indeed text your message and the word talk to 87222. It is a little bit more light-hearted than grooming gangs and the terrorist attacks in the United States, but still one that is very, very serious indeed, because the drive, no pun intended, by Ed Miliband to eradicate the country of all cars that are powered by internal combustion engines by 2030 is still in place. This is his diktat, his wish, and including seemingly hybrid cars also, so anything with a petrol or a diesel engine. So let's be clear, there's only 5 years away. Of course, there are all sorts of issues with this. It's pointless, because even if every single car was electric, it would have no bearing on the effect on the planet whatsoever. But also the manufacturers, of course, themselves of cars generally, having been subjected to these targets, these numbers that the government have imposed on them, where the percentage of electric vehicles has to be of a particular level compared to total output. The manufacturers, of course, are saying that that is completely impractical and unsustainable when it comes to that meeting demand. In other words, car buyers, car drivers haven't got the memo. Well, look, let's talk about this in some more detail now with Ross Clark, who is author of Not Zero. I'll say that again, Not Zero, and how an irrational target will impoverish you, help China, and won't even save the planet. I think, Ross, you've just summed it up in the title of your book.
Good morning, Russell.
Good morning.
Yes, so if we just rewind a few weeks on this story, I mean, if you remember, Stellantis, which is a parent group of Vauxhall, announced it's going to close the Luton plant as a result of this thing called the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate, which demanded that 22% of cars sold last year were pure electric. This year it'll be 28%, rising to 80% by 2030. And the car manufacturers have having supported that ZEV initially, are now warning that it's killing their industry. Now, the government a few weeks ago said, well, look, we'll review the rules on the phase-out of petrol and diesel vehicles, leading us to believe that they're going to relax the sort of targets a bit. But, you know, it now seems that that's not necessarily actually going to be the case. And yesterday, this group called Electric Vehicles UK, which is a trade body for sort of electric car industry, was imploring the government to go back to what had been the previous government's initial policy of banning all petrol and diesel cars by 2030, which is just 5 years away. And, you know, given the low demand for electric vehicles, it's virtually impossible to see how they're suddenly going to pick up all this interest in just 5 years, the point when, you know, we'd all be happy buying electric vehicles, which of course we won't be, because they cost too much to buy, and if you don't have your own driveway, your own facility for recharging, it can be very expensive to run.
Ross, let's look at the reality, shall we, of non-combustion engine vehicles. This ideology, really, this kind of climate lunacy that is being enforced upon the consumer. The consumer, in terms of what they want, is completely out of step with the likes of Ed Miliband and others that are insisting that this higher and higher proportion of cars that are manufactured and sold in the UK are electric. Let's just look at the reality of the consumer-led response to this. So we have electric vehicles that are generally more expensive in the first place. They are also more expensive to insure. That's because if they have accidents and the accident damages the battery, that is a significant cost in terms of repair. So therefore, obviously, the risk in financial terms is higher. But the other big issue is because the government, of course, tried to incentivise people to buy electric vehicles by way of giving people 100% tax deductibility. So in other words, buy an electric vehicle for £50,000, get £50,000 off your tax bill, I think going back 3 or 4 years. So a wonderful tax swerve, which obviously won't last, that will be curtailed. But the fact is then that when all of those cars go back on the market in number, there is not the appetite for those as used cars, because of course the incentive is on the new cars by way of that tax deductibility. So the consequence, and this should have been worked out, one would imagine, is that the depreciation level on electric cars, I mean, and some of them, I'll take the Porsche Taycan, by the way, as an example, loses up to 50% of its value in year one. Now, who on earth is going to buy a car for £100,000 knowing that in year one it's going to lose £50,000 of its value? And presumably, by way of the law of school economics even, if more and more cars are forced upon the consumer, they'll have to be discounted even more, which means that that will be even higher.
Yes, I mean, it got worse. It wasn't just the company car perks, rather. For years, the government was offering £4,000 grants towards buying electric cars. It was enormous wad of money that's coming out of
the taxpayers' pocket.
Ordinary taxpayers were being forced to subsidise the sort of, green dreams of this relatively wealthy group of the population who are able to afford an electric car. And, you know, if you want people to drive electric cars, and I mean, there's every reason why we should want to move to cleaner vehicles. If you want to encourage that, you've got to get the technology to a stage where the cars are selling themselves, where people actually want to buy them. Now, in China, China has got a large electric car industry. There's a lot of people buy electric cars in China now, but they didn't get there by the government banning petrol and diesel. They got there because the manufacturers out there had really concentrated on bringing down the costs of manufacturing electric vehicles.
So the consumer price was cheaper, and therefore, by way of a free market, ironically in China, those cheaper vehicle prices attracted genuine buyer interest.
Yes, and that's the same for all green technology. And we've got this similar thing on houses with heat pumps and so on. You know, the heat pumps are not selling themselves because they cost too much to buy and too much to run. You know, they can cost more to heat your house that way than it does with a gas boiler. And very few people are going to want to sort of make an investment in that sort of situation where they know it's actually going to cost them money.
And Ross, just a last question. If every vehicle in Britain was an electric vehicle, what difference would it make to the planet in terms of climate change?
Well, virtually none, because, well, for one thing, electric vehicle is not zero emission, really. I mean, no...
Well, the power has to come from somewhere.
Come out the tailpipe, but in the manufacturing process, they actually involve more carbon emissions than a petrol and diesel car, and you've got to drive for maybe 15,000 miles.
It's an absolute racket. Ross Clark, author of Not Zero, thank you very much indeed, sir. Quick word from Philip Ingram. Big fan of electric cars?
No, they're nice to drive, but they don't have the range. The battery technology is not there. Yeah, the battery technology is not there. They don't keep the second-hand value, and batteries wear out very quickly, so they've got no second-hand value.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they seem to be a false profit, don't they, by my contention. But Ed Miliband, I'm afraid, be assured he's going to continue to force them upon us, whilst he and Keir Starmer, of course, carry out multiple trips on an annual basis in gas-guzzling aeroplanes. Surprise, surprise. The hypocrisy knows no bounds. OK, well, look, I will be back after this, and we'll be talking about more stuff that interests you. This is Talk. I'm Russell Quirk.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in on the far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
The Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Back to Talk. I'm Russell Quirk, here till 1 o'clock, joined by Philip Ingram also. He's also here till 1 o'clock. Lots and lots of guests coming up, including Jonathan Haslam, who is next. So we're going to be talking politics with him, migrant crossings, a lacklustre, woeful police. And what I really want to get into is Keir Starmer. Another lack of judgment, another blunder, this time whilst on holiday in Madeira. Can you believe this? We really do have a hapless Prime Minister, don't we? Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Hello, Russell, and Happy New Year to you and Philip.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Jonathan.
Happy New Year to you. So, where shall we start? I'm very, very keen to get to the Starmer toboggan incident, but let's talk about some slightly more serious stuff first of all. Channel migrant crossings surging, up by 25% in the last year. It seems that Starmer and Cooper, sounds like a really bad law firm, in fact, technically it is, they are, they don't really have a handle on the promises that they made to us in order to get elected, do they?
Not at this stage. It's a European problem. I'm uncertain at this stage, and probably all of the academics will be, about whether the rather benign conditions we've had for quite a lot of time in the Channel have anything.
You mean weather-wise?
Yeah. Or whether or not it is a reaction to the abandonment of the Rwandan policy that the Conservative government had. What we've got to do, of course, is to look for areas where we can cooperate with people. I suppose there are some good signs there. And the Times has reported something today which may be very interesting about the possibility of identifying potential people smugglers early on and putting restrictions on them. I'd be fascinated to see how that works. It looks like it's incredibly complicated.
Well, this is the announcement from Yvette Cooper in the Home Office today, isn't it? That
that's right.
Yvette Cooper seems to think that waving the magic wand of taking potential and suspected people smugglers off of TikTok and Instagram, that along with maybe confiscating their laptops and not allowing them to travel, will somehow stop this growing, and it is clearly from the data, this growing problem of illegal migration. But that really is for the birds, isn't it? Because that specifically only will apply to those that are in the UK. We don't have any jurisdiction in France or Italy or Greece or Turkey or Albania.
Indeed, and it'll be fascinating to see how it does work. And there's an awful lot to be done with social media and law enforcement people as well. So I think we've got to find out, as a European problem, how we could cooperate with other people and say, well, where are we processing to find out where the genuine cases of hardship and people who are applying for asylum should actually rest. Now, I'm completely befuddled why we can't have a processing centre out in France, for example.
But wouldn't that encourage lots more people, Jonathan, if they didn't even have to make the journey, which is basically the only barrier to getting here, the only kind of hardship element is having to brave that 13 miles straight across the English Channel. If they didn't even have to contend with that as an obstacle, I mean, we would see an even bigger influx. And the problem is, of course, in Britain, we grant nearly 70% of asylum applications. Even those applications come from people that reside in the likes of Vietnam and India and Albania.
I think that the counterbalance to that is the fact that Italy is looking at seeing if it can have a centre for processing outside Italy, and it faces a huge problem from North Africa. It's also paying the Libyan government an awful lot of money to be able to hold people there. So there are a variety of ways in which we can consider how we deal with this. And the other thing that I would do is, rather than just reaching for that lever that says, let's just leave the European Court of Convention of Human Rights, is just to say, actually, there are other countries who are interested in making changes, and should we do that? So hold on to the moral authority that convention does give you in many respects, but also allows you to deal with people who are gaming the system to get over here. But plenty
Jonathan,
to be done.
But Jonathan, that assumes that, I mean, the ECHR can't just be replaced by, let's say, a British Bill of Rights, which is something that Dominic Raab talked about years ago. As a consequence of that and other things, he was hounded out of office for being a bully. I mean, we don't need to be linked to anything European. I mean, we've already made our feelings known as a nation with regard to how we feel about Europe as a trading partner, and when it comes to Europe as being sovereign over our rules and regulations. We don't need Europe to tell us how to run our human rights, do we?
We're not suggesting that they are telling us how to run our human rights. What we're suggesting is actually you work in collaboration for a European-wide problem. So it is interesting to see if that would actually make a bit of a difference.
Well, look, we've already tried collaborating with France by giving them £500 million. That collaboration seemed rather costly and resulted in absolutely nout when it comes to success.
You're being a bit hard on the French there. I mean, they've got a very long coastline, and they are starting to. How
have they helped us, John?
Quite a lot.
How have they helped us?
I think we've got to be fair in this one, Russell. They are doing quite a lot.
Where's the value for money in that £500 million, Jonathan?
Well, the value for money is in understanding the links between organised crime throughout the whole of Europe. It's seeing that supply lines of vehicles, the boats are turning more and more difficult to change. But the other thing that we think we've got to look at here is the potential for us all to benefit from having a more coordinated policy. There's no easy answer to it. Absolutely, people who are desperate will, as you say, try to cross that last barrier.
Jonathan, I'm not convinced that coordination is the answer. I think it's prevention. Let's move on to another subject.
One last point we do have to mention, though, unintended consequences with the convention, Russell, would be how do we deal with all of the issues bound up in Northern Ireland? And that's a longer conversation conversation, but
that's for another day. That's for another day. But yes, I don't deny that that's complex. Our police force, and I don't mean the rank and file, who I think are pretty downtrodden by the idiots that seem to run our police forces at a senior level, reported today that cops abandon 4 unsolved crimes every minute, a large percentage of crimes not even having a perpetrator associated to them, so no detection work being done. Across the country, of course, particularly when it comes to very serious crimes, particularly rape, our detection rate, the police detection rate, plummeting. What has happened to our police force, Jonathan?
I think there's been a number of factors here. First of all, austerity had quite a big impact because they cut
But we're
back
back to the same level of police officers that we were 5-6 years ago. 147,000 police officers now.
Yeah, we are back to them, but actually we haven't made great strides. The other thing I would say is that I think there has been a failure of leadership. There have been too many chief constables who've not actually paid enough attention to the law and giving the lead that their officers need. Because I think we agree that actually one of the most reassuring signs is, I know it sounds like an old cliche and a hobby horse, but a bobby on a beat counts for an awful lot.
And we never see them. We never see them. Where I live, I only see them with blue lights on going to an incident, probably one that's been reported several hours previously. I don't see the police walking down Brentwood or Shenfield High Street, and I'm sure that whether you're in Chelmsford, Salisbury, Aylesbury, you would say the same. There is no deterrent. There are no police on the beat, even though we are back up to numbers. I agree that resource obviously is part of the problem, and that we should have another 20, 30 or even 40,000 police officers. I don't buy, by the way, the Labour edict today that this is all the fault of the Tories and the fact that there aren't enough police community support officers. I mean, they are what we used to refer to as plastic police officers. They have no power of arrest anyway. It's going wrong. I'm not convinced, though, entirely, Jonathan, that it's all a question of resource, because we are back up to those numbers. So where are the police hiding?
I think the police are stuck with an awful lot of bureaucracy. I think they're stuck with leaders who aren't as effective as they ought to be. And I think that we also have to accept that they are asked to do an awful lot of stuff beyond policing. You look at the fact that social care does leave an awful lot of people with mental health problems out on the streets, and the police are the people we look to try to solve some of those issues as well. We ask too much of them, there aren't enough of them, and we have to make those decisions at a level where people can say, this is where we want to see our money go, and where we want to see the proper effective use of the police service and the prison service and the criminal justice system.
I think what we both
prosecute more people more quickly.
Absolutely, we definitely agree on that. We also agree that leadership is the problem here, and I think once the police turn to their fixation that their leaders had to have, a degree in this and a master's degree in that, rather than the likes of our old friend Peter Blexley, for instance, being in a senior position, a good old-fashioned copper that knew how to police. We seem to have become a kind of, the police service has become almost an academic, woke establishment that doesn't seem to be particularly concerned about crime or indeed victims. Right, let's get on to the story here that I really want to talk about, just because it's a bit more light-hearted. Philip Ingram's laughing already. This is Keir Starmer on holiday. You know, the holiday he said he wouldn't go on because his brother sadly had died. Well, he did go on holiday 24 hours after that statement, by the way, but apparently decided with his family to rock up to a queue that was a toboggan, one of these toboggans that goes down a hill, and it's all very exciting. Some people, including lots of Brits that then delighted in taking photographs and video, some of them have been queuing for 3 hours for this particular toboggan ride. Keir Starmer turns up with his family, with his police officers in tow, jumps to the front of the queue, and off he goes, having jumped in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. Now, this might not seem a big deal, but I think it is on the basis of yet another catastrophic lack of judgment. It's hardly man of the people stuff, Jonathan, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, it does beg a belief, really. Though I suppose the one thing, certainly, unless I've read the story incorrectly, Starmer himself didn't go on the toboggan, which is now world famous, and I'd never heard of it before yesterday. It's apparently a 2-kilometre long ride, which takes 10 minutes. So it's at least a little bit better if you're going to queue for 3 hours. And the idea, nonetheless, that you can go and jump the queue is wrong, when there's a much better thing to do, which is to say, look, kids, if you really want to go and do this, great, I'll pay for you. You go there, you queue, and by the way, a smart spin doctor would say, and we leak the story afterwards, saying Keir's learned lessons and his kids know what's going on.
It's almost even worse that he didn't go on it. I mean, you know, at least otherwise he would have said, look, you know, for security purposes. Philip Ingram, I'm sure you have a comment on this.
Yeah, but, you know, Jonathan, this is symptomatic of a lot of things that are going wrong in government communications, full stop. You know, this is the latest, but we saw the cringe-worthy Christmas tree lights switch on outside Downing Street. We heard a very wooden New Year's speech. We'll go back to the last government. We had the Sunak debacle at D-Day. And then when it comes to the bigger issues, the government tends to react and is not proactive in any way in its communications and is always trying to play catch-up. And in this social media-enabled world, you can't put the genie back in the bottle again. You know, how do we fix it?
Well, I think you look for more political nous, actually, understanding the people and understanding the impact of what you do and recognising that it is scrutinised 24/7 relentlessly. And if you want the job, those are the conditions that you take them on nowadays. It's different to when I was in Downing Street and John Major, but there would always be that thought. Get back to your constituency, understand what people feel. And for example, when you're looking at the thing that begged belief, as far as I was concerned, you know, Keir Starmer having somebody buy his eyeglasses and buy his suits. You know, it's just not.
I mean, literally bad optics. Again, look, pun completely intended.
He made a complete spectacle of himself.
And so on and so on. Talking of political clowns, let's talk about Sadiq Khan. So he's now Sir Sadiq Khan, not that I'll be referring to him as such, because I don't think he deserves it. To be knighted for failure on the basis of him having presided over a huge increase in crime, particularly violent crime, an increasing housing crisis insofar as him only building about 20% of the homes that he promised, bankrupting TfL not once but twice, and taxing London motorists till the pipsqueak by way of ULEZ and the ULEZ extension. I mean, they are hardly successes, they're hardly accolades that really should be bestowed upon someone like Sadiq Khan in terms of a knighthood. But it seems, and again, I think this is a lack of political judgment, Sadiq Khan reveals that his children thinks that he's sold out and that he shouldn't have accepted the knighthood. Well, isn't it funny how his children seem to agree with most of the population of Britain?
Yeah, again, a complete lack of political nous. If you want to accept it quietly, with grace, and go up and enjoy yourself, talking to King Charles or maybe Prince William, and enjoy the garden party that you get invited to afterwards. But otherwise, no, keep quiet. Smells.
Oh, I think we might have lost Jonathan for a second there. Philip, you agree with me, I think, I'm sure, that he's not worthy of such an honour.
Definitely.
But the other thing that I think is very, very interesting when it comes to this huge kind of smorgasbord of honours that Keir Starmer has bestowed upon his mates in the New Year's Honours list, which, yes, it's rubber-stamped by the King, but this is Keir Starmer's list. These are Labour politicians that in previous years, particularly when they were in sixth form, banging on about, you know, everyone being equal and, you know, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains, and all this Marxist gobbledygook. These would also be the same politicians that wanted to get rid of the House of Lords, that didn't like honours and thought it was for the elite. Isn't it funny how when someone like Sadiq Khan, who I'm sure we can find something somewhere where he in previous years has said, oh, you know, these honours things, you know, they're not for us ordinary working people, they're pompous. When it's suggested to him that he should have one, he duly accepts. Now, that is an absolute shining example of left-wing hypocrisy.
Oh, very much so. You know, the honour system is coordinated by the Cabinet Office. It is a politically driven system. The vast majority of those that get honours deserve them because they're people from within different communities who are doing fantastic things. But when you get to politicians, you get people in political levels and you get politically motivated honours. That's what undermines the whole system. And Sadiq Khan is a politically minded honour for failure.
Well, and let's not forget that the other Sir in the mix here is Sir Keir Starmer, who we've already referenced was a failure as the Director of Public Prosecutions. He's now definitely on his way to being probably the biggest failure as a Prime Minister that this country's ever seen. And yes, they get knighted and given peerages and Baron this and Dame that. I think it's absolutely disgusting. I think actually the honour system should only be for ordinary people that have gone above and beyond, that have worked all their lives in the pursuit of charitable exploits and so on. Definitely not for lifelong politicians and, public sector civil servants that have just been in a job for a few years and get an honour as a consequence. Let's just take a voice note now from Darren, who's talking about migration further to our conversation earlier.
Russell, Darren from Suffolk, great show. I wonder who is advising these Labour people. Surely what they could have done is gone over to France and talked to the French and come up with a solution and said to the people on the 1st of January, we've got a solution. What we're going to do is anybody that comes over on a boat without identification will be shipped back on the next ferry. And that will soon stop the boats in 2 days. What are we doing in return? Yeah, we're giving the French a bit of more fishing rights, or we've come up with a quota, but it'll be people with passports for a processing centre in Calais. It's not rocket science. If both sides wanted to stop it, they could do it tomorrow, but they don't. It's the WEF, the World Economic Forum, they're their disciples. This is what they want them to do.
Yes, and indeed Care for Calais, the RNLI and so on, all these other enablers, controversial as that might be. I stopped donating to the RNLI because they have effectively become a taxi service for illegal migrants, picked up in French waters and brought all the way to Britain rather than being taken back to where they came from. Let me know what you think of all this. 0344 499 1000. We're going to be taking your calls after the break and indeed reading out some more text messages. You can text us here 87222 or do what Darren has just done, which is to leave a WhatsApp voice note on 0344 499 1000. Back after this.
Well, my response to all these events is to wait and to discover much more about them than we could possibly know at this stage. To rule nothing out, of course, it is perfectly possible that the events are linked and that there is some terrorist element, but it's also possible that they're not, and that there might be some other reason involved. I am very reluctant to get involved in any speculation about what this is about until we know a great deal more about the perpetrators and about the background.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Hello and good morning. Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'm here with you till 1 o'clock. Then I'm handing over to Ian Collins. It's time for some calls. Chris from London has called 03444 991 wants to talk about, should we call them, Chris, rape gangs? Because they're not grooming gangs, are they? As Philip Ingram pointed out earlier on, let's tell it how it is. These are rape gangs.
Yeah, hi, Russell. Hi, Philip.
Hi.
Hi, in fact, I'm the Chris that X'd you in some excerpts from the court papers, and the father that was held a press conference. The court details make desperate reading. Really, really upsetting. Russell, you're right to talk about it, but the numbers that you're talking about, you're way under. There was 1,400 girls in Rochdale alone.
Wow,
right?
Just in Rochdale?
Just in Rochdale. And this is going on across the country. It will upset you, but have a look at your
well, I will. I mean, let's tread a little bit carefully because it is 11:25 a.m. But we also want to talk about the subject, Chris, and the reality of it. I mean, I saw on X earlier on that there was a map of Britain, and on that map were highlighted the areas where this activity, this criminality, as it is, has taken place, and as we talked about earlier on, may well still be taking place. I think the contention that this is historic, that this is an old story, is not right. I mean, this is still happening. And, of course, the reason it's happening is because for decades, people, particularly Pakistani men, have run these grooming gangs, these rape gangs, and got away with it because people in authority and in power have allowed them to do so. So we talk a lot about Telford, Rochdale, Rotherham, Oldham, but also Sheffield, Stockport, Derby, Nottingham, Peterborough, Leicester, Coventry, Redditch, Banbury, Aylesbury, Wendover, Ilford and Barking, Chelmsford, Ipswich, Hull, Bolton. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So are you in receipt of anything by way of data that might stand up in terms of how many girls have been affected by this atrocity over recent decades?
Right, the reason I said to redirect is I'm not going to say anything that could upset readers because it's too upsetting.
Well, no, don't say anything graphic, Chris, but you can talk numbers. I mean, what numbers do you think are involved here?
We're talking tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands of young girls?
Tens of thousands. All right, it's you only have to look at find the court hearings that have already happened, and I urge everybody. I joined the Free Speech Union as a gold member because I got worried about posting stuff on various social media platforms about this and other things, about my opinions about the government, about what's happening. But what people need to watch, and millions, I think it's over 60 million now watched it, and I never liked the guy to start with.
Yeah, I'm going to hurry you, Chris. I've got loads and loads of calls waiting.
Tommy Robinson's film Silenced.
Yeah, OK. All right. Look Chris, I'm going to move on, but look, thanks for your call and for highlighting the fact that, the numbers here are huge, and the number of victims are huge, but also the number of people, therefore, that covered this up for decades and decades. Senior police officers, council officials, maybe councillors, covered this stuff up. What should happen to them? They should be investigated. They should go through the legal system by way of due process, and where there is evidence, as I'm sure there is, they should be prosecuted and imprisoned for complicity, in my opinion. OK, let's go to another call now. Ashley in London, who doesn't want to talk about rape gangs. You want to talk about something of a slightly less serious nature, I think, Ashley.
You took the words out. I was going to say, all of a sudden, my conversation is insignificant.
Well, but in a way, look, there's change gears is always good, and look, we are nothing but agile on Talk.
What I was going to say to you is I'm an EV driver. I had a Range Rover, had a Porsche before that, so I changed over to EV for my own circumstances. And I've got to tell you, for the 2 years, a bit weird at first, but actually never charging, being able to charge at home has been fantastic, and actually the car's been great. I just think that it's been demonised a bit simply because of government policy about it. You know, I'm not someone that believes, everyone should drive an EV. I just think that there's a balance that's appropriate. And also there's a time of transition, which obviously all governments don't seem to be able to handle, and the effect it has on manufacturers. And, over time, great, and it will work. But doing it immediately, it won't. I was just going to give you one scenario, and I know you're busy, but a friend of mine, give you an example what car companies are up against. A friend of mine bought a new car, I won't say the brand, but a high-value brand. She waited for it. She ordered it. She got told it's being delayed by 6 months in addition to the wait. And she said, this is ridiculous. Why? It goes, well, the car's actually physically here in the country, but we can't sell it to you because if we've sold a certain amount of petrol cars, if we send this car to you and a couple of other customers, we're going to be fine.
Well, because they need to make sure that the next year's target is hit, and they'd already gone over it and therefore had to hold that car back.
Yeah, so basically they've had to hold back some of the cars.
Whatever happened to, Ashley, whatever happened to free markets? I take your point that you made at the beginning of your call where you said, look, you're getting on very, very well with your EV. You like it. It suits you. That's fine. I have absolutely no problem with EVs per se. I mean, they're not for me for a bunch of reasons, and I think there are some downsides. However, we should let the free market prevail, shouldn't we, when it comes to consumers deciding whether they want, a petrol or a diesel or a hybrid or an EV, not be dictated to by Ed Miliband that in the next 3 or 4 years, 80% of all vehicles have to be electric.
No, but I think what you do is you allow it to go naturally. So what you do as a government, in my opinion, if I was in government, God forbid, right, my philosophy would be to keep up with, if I wanted to transition to this and it's going to take an X amount of time, I would continue with incentives. I would look at... But hang on, Ashley, though. But the problem with incentives is, what you mean is taxpayer subsidies. Why should I, as a non-EV believer, pay, with respect to you, pay for you to drive an EV that you're only buying because it's subsidised? No, I appreciate about free choice, but lots of things get changed in time, and transition. People's view on what is right and what is wrong is what we get used to as well. And I just think that sometimes, you've got a technology at the moment which is it's early stages, so you need to do certain things over a certain period to look at transition. It doesn't just go for cars; it goes for lots of other things as well, right? There's lots of things we put incentives on tax for in order to push people into doing certain things.
Yeah, but actually, normally if there's a point to them at the end in terms of there being a net benefit, and I and many others are not convinced that having a world full of EVs or a country full of EVs makes the difference to the planet in climate terms that some would advance. Ashley, look, thank you very much indeed for your call. Fair argument. I don't agree with the fact that they should be forced upon us, and I certainly don't agree with the fact that EVs should be subsidised so that people can buy them less expensively, but at the expense of the general taxpayer. That isn't right, in my opinion. Let me know what you think, though. 0344 499 1000. Are EVs the magic bullet to the problem of man-made climate change? I rather don't think so. Back after this with Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer. We probably won't agree on much.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'm still joined by Philip Ingram. Philip, let's talk again about migration, because obviously it is in the news yet again for a couple of reasons, really. First of all, the fact that obviously we now have the 2024 numbers. Lo and behold, surprise, surprise, the migration number by way of small boats alone, so what I would call the illegal immigration, but others might call, I think the new term, the fluffy woke term, is irregular migration, whatever that means. So the number for 2024, 36,816 people turned up on our shores on small boats having crossed the channel. That's up 25% on 2023. If, Philip, 36,800 people turned up on our beaches tomorrow in one go, we'd call it an invasion, wouldn't we?
We would do. And that is a significant number and is putting a huge burden on us as taxpayers across the country and attacking our resources. And a small percentage of those that come in are criminals, and a percentage of those, again, are terrorists.
Yep, and we've got no idea who they are.
We've got no idea who they are, because they tear up their identity documents just so they can get in.
And why do you think they do that?
Because they don't want to be identified. They know that...
Because they've got something to hide.
Yeah, they know that if their real background came out, they wouldn't be eligible for asylum. Some of them have been not granted asylum in various other countries across Europe, and they get to the UK, and all of a sudden, our doors are thrown wide open. Not only do we give them asylum, but we pay them lots of money.
As a man that's had a career in security and terrorism prevention, do we even fingerprint these people that come over? So these 36,816, and again, let's be clear, predominantly men in their 20s and 30s. You don't see many women or children coming over on those small boats. I mean, thank goodness, because, of course, the other issue is the deaths that result from those crossings. So last year, it's apparent that there were something like 77 deaths by way of those crossings that we're aware of. That was more than the previous 3 years combined. So we should be under no illusion. This is a very, very dangerous thing to do. But are these people even identified? OK, they don't have documents, but are they fingerprinted? A, so that we can try and find out through Interpol who they are, but also so we can track them by way of their behaviour in the future.
Well, when they come in, yes, they are fingerprinted, biometrics are taken and everything else, but they're not held in a closed camp, they're not held in a prison, so tracking them through the rest of the country, we don't have identity cards in this country. We don't have a way of tracking normal citizens. We don't have a requirement like in Germany. If you move into a different town, you have got a set period of time to register with the local council in that town, to get your identity documents in, to prove that you're there, and if you don't, you've broken the law. If you go to buy a mobile phone in Germany, in the Netherlands or anywhere else, you have to provide identity documents, a proof of address and everything else. You can't just get everything for free. It happens in this country with no identity
the counter, though, of
whatsoever.
Course. I mean, Tony Blair famously tried to introduce ID cards. I think he's been back on that, actually, recently, trying to influence Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper that ID cards, digital ID cards, perhaps, would be a great idea. I find all that rather sinister. And the problem, of course, as well, is that making us all carry ID cards because of, actually, from a population perspective, what is a minority of people coming over here. I mean, that doesn't sit well with me. Perhaps ID cards for those that come over on small boats. But of course, the previous government tried to make this whole thing illegal by way of the illegal migration bill, which was introduced by Suella Braverman when she was Home Secretary in 2023, which was that if you come over here with no identity and whether you actually apply for asylum or not, it will be deemed as an illegal act and that you would then potentially be off to Rwanda to be processed. The Labour government have cancelled that. So, I'm not sure this is as well publicised as it should be, on the basis that not only has the Rwanda initiative been canned before it even got off the ground, literally, at a cost of about £400 million, but also it seems the act of arriving here illegally automatically, or it being automatically deemed illegal, has also been kiboshed. Well, how can it not be illegal to turn up in this country without identification and to falsely, as in many, many cases, claim asylum on the basis that really what you are is an economic migrant. How on earth can Labour countenance that this was the right thing to do?
Yeah. I'm not an immigration lawyer. I understood beforehand that arriving in this country without going through the normal channels is illegal. The difficulty is there are no normal channels, and that's why what we found was that a lot of the left-leaning lawyers were actually taking every opportunity and wasting taxpayers' money to try and fight every time someone was being put into a deportation plane.
Yeah.
And we saw instances where individuals who were convicted rapists who were being deported were saved from deportation by
the passengers and crew.
Passengers and crew.
They thought it was cruel to deport them, even though they were convicted rapists.
And then they go out to rape again.
Yes.
And this is the trouble that we have. We've got too many do-gooders who are putting the whole of the country at risk.
Yeah.
And this is where we need to stop that. European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR that we keep talking about, is equally applicable in Denmark, Holland, Netherlands, France, but they ignore it.
Yep.
And they just deport people.
And they certainly have in the likes of Hungary. I mean, Hungary being fined on a daily basis, but Viktor Orbán, the President of Hungary, has kind of stuck his fingers up at that,
exactly.
as they have in Poland and Slovakia and so on.
And we should do the same.
We are, yes, for some reason, we insist on abiding by somebody else's rules and regulations to our own detriment. Let's take a call, Philip, now. Mark from Lincolnshire's called. Mark, thanks for calling Talk.
Hi there, Russell, mate.
Hi.
Yeah, hi there. The illegal immigration thing, and this whole notion, this whole suggestion that we have to be working with Europe, to me, that's a completely wrong way to be approaching this. We do not have to work with Europe at all. The EU's illegal migration problem is the EU's problem. What they're doing within their realm, within their remit, is their issue, it's their problem. What we do with ours, how we protect our borders, is our problem.
Yep.
We're an island nation. We're by far the best place within Europe to actually tackle this problem as a supposedly sovereign nation, yet we choose not to. And you have to start wondering why that reason is. Why are we not doing that? Because, there is absolutely nothing stopping us tackling this issue. There are many, many things we could do. As far as I'm concerned, France are breaking laws left, right and centre by allowing these people to leave their shores without documentation.
Well, they will want them to, won't they? I mean, Mark, they will want them to leave their shores because if you've got hundreds and maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of migrants that have actually been refused asylum in France because... let's be honest here. France has an acceptance rate of something less than 5%. So about 5% of asylum applications are approved in France. We accept nearly 70%. So, of course, if you go through the process in France, you then get a free go by way of being able to get over the channel to Britain. I suspect what we're going to see, I'm afraid, in Keir Starmer's endeavours to have closer and closer ties with the EU, we will end up in a situation where there is collaboration, and this is what Jonathan was talking about earlier, collaboration by way of us having to accept what would be deemed our fair share of migrants to reflect that which is taken by Spain, Italy, France, Germany, and so on. And we should be very, very concerned about that, because if we think currently there's a problem in terms of illegal and indeed legal migration being too much, people not integrating, it having an economic effect, and indeed, as Philip Ingram rightly points out, an element of these people coming over the channel on boats that are criminals and terrorists. Well, I suspect literally those floodgates are about to open even further under this Labour government. Mark in Lincolnshire, thanks very much indeed. We're going to take a break and come back in a second where we are going to be talking about the problem that is Wales.
Well, I think we should be concerned about the threat posed by Islamist terror attacks. We have seen a number of Islamist attacks over recent years happen on UK soil. Of course, many, many more have been foiled by counter-terrorism policing and the security services, besides those that have tragically taken place. So I think all of us should do everything we can to support CT policing and the security services.
And you lucky people have got 4 of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
There is
know what to ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
he's got nipples.
I don't know.
Across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. If you want to join me this morning and into this afternoon, myself and Philip Ingram, who's my wingman till 1 o'clock, call us 0344 499 1000, or indeed you can text 87222 plus the word Talk and then your message. Lots and lots of people have done that. We've already taken a few calls. We will take more before the end of the show, and a number of text messages, particularly on EVs, actually. Let me just read you a couple quickly. Ashley is obviously lucky enough to be able to charge his car at home. Us peasants living on streets with terraced houses don't have that luxury, says Stephen Cartwright. Michelle says, I simply don't want an EV. My friend's father has a top-of-the-range Tesla, and he's already fed up with it, and it's only been 6 months. There you go. Right, let's talk about Wales. I said the problem of Wales. The Labour government that runs Wales and has done for some time leaves a bit to be desired. I think we should have looked at Wales in a bit more detail before we elected Keir Starmer, I think, because Wales is the benchmark for lots and lots of issues, particularly with regard to the NHS. The NHS, of course, failing in Wales, waiting lists at an all-time high, critical ambulance issues over the last day or two of the Christmas period, whereby nearly 400 calls to ambulance call centres went unanswered. So not just a problem of ambulances not turning up, which of course is well publicised, but not even getting your emergency call answered, and so on. But at the same time, Wales spending money, of course, yes, you've guessed it, on international relations and diversity. And let's talk about this in some more detail now with Jamie Jenkins. He's the former head of health analysis at the ONS. So, Jamie, a man that likes facts, that's good.
Good morning, you okay?
Yeah, good morning. Very, very well. Happy New Year to you. Let's talk about the problem that is Wales then, particularly when it comes to the NHS. All sorts of issues, but particularly in terms of, it seems there, could we say, misallocation of funds? I mean, they've decided to spend £8 million on international relations. They've also decided to spend £135,000 on a project that supports the delivery of their anti-racist Wales action plan, but they can't answer the phone in their ambulance call centres.
No, and it's shocking. And you've got to remember what devolution is there for. It's to run Wales. So Wales shouldn't really need to have an international department because we've got a UK government to look at the international stage for us. So why Wales is getting involved kind of on international matters is beyond me. And the devolution, obviously, remember when Tony Blair brought this in many, many years ago under the previous Labour government, what it does allow you to do, Russell, is do things differently. And they've criticised the Conservatives for the last 10 or 12 years, the Labour Party, in terms of the running of the NHS, where it's been run under a Labour Party in Wales now for the last 25, 26 years. And
how's that going? How's that going, Jamie?
Yeah, and what we've ended up with is much worse outcomes. So we've got worse waiting lists than we have in England. And obviously, when you adjust for the population, they still come out worse in Wales. And a stark reminder of that is if you look at people on waiting lists in England and you compare them to Wales, for example, then the number of people on the waiting list who've been waiting over a year. Now, in England, at the moment, it's around 3.3%. So of all the people on the waiting lists, 3.3% have been waiting for a year or more. In Wales, on the numbers on the waiting list in Wales, is 23.3%, massive numbers compared to England. And so really, if Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer, when they were doing the election campaign, saying they've got all these plans for the NHS, they've had ample opportunity to trial and do things differently in Wales.
Well, they should have looked at what was happening in Wales under, Marcus Rashford, for instance, obviously the former head of the Welsh Government. They should have looked at that and done the opposite, shouldn't they?
Oh, of course, things haven't gone good in Wales for a long, long time. And you're right to call out some of the nonsense that the spending in Wales is spent on. It is absolute nonsense. And the things that really call into question as well is the ambulance calls over Christmas as well. There's some shocking statistics there that people aren't getting their ambulances kind of calls answered. And the big issue you've got, and this is an issue in England as well, let's just paint this as about Wales, but you look at the NHS overall, and it happens every single winter, ambulances stuck outside hospitals. And how many governments have talked about reforming social care? Because what you've got there, Russell, is ambulances turn up, they can't put the patient into the hospital because there's no beds in the hospital in the A&E, because people in A&E can't be put on wards, because people on wards can't be discharged into the community.
And this is not really a problem of, let's be honest and clear here, this is not really a problem of money and resource. This is such instances that you've just highlighted. That's a problem of organisation, surely. The fact that they can't get people out of hospital into whether it be social care or elderly care or just back home efficiently enough means that you end up every winter, and it does tend to be winter, almost as if winter arrives as some kind of surprise to the NHS, Jamie. This happens every single year. It's a question of organisation and inefficiency.
I think you're spot on there, because we think that the social care system is separate from the NHS. So NHS managers and aren't going to fix the discharge problem because that's somewhere else. And if you remember when Theresa May tried to reform the social care, and then a couple of years ago when she went into the election and lost the kind of majority that she had, governments don't want to tackle this one. They don't want to put more money in by perhaps taxing elderly people more and things. And there's different ways you can look at the funding of social care, because we always seem to find money, as you've been talking today, for all the migrants who are coming over on small boats. So
£8 million a year to run £8 billion a year to run the asylum process in this country. But let's also be clear that Wes Streeting has announced another £20 billion into the English NHS over the next 2 years. I don't have a lot of confidence that, given that most of these problems are organisational, that money is going to make any difference at all.
No, what we want there, Russell, is ideas, not money being ploughed in, because there's record money going in all the time. What you've got to remember as well is that, we're an ageing population. One of the successes in the Western world is that, life expectancy has been improving over the last 20 or 30 years. We've got a large cohort of people born after the Second World War, those baby boomers, hitting that point in time where the demand on the NHS is going to go up. And ultimately, with the population growing through migration as well, we're going to need more resources in the NHS. But just pumping more and more money in, I can guarantee we could have a conversation next December, next January, about all the problems with ambulances stuck outside hospitals. So
we're going to have the same issues. Well, look, there is more money in the NHS, not just this government that's decided to put more money in, but the previous government, the Conservative government, allocated more money, and it's made absolutely no difference whatsoever to outcomes, whether it be remedies, whether it be waiting lists. And of course, we've also seen in the news today, and this might be part of the problem, and quite how you solve this, I don't know, and that is that we as a population don't help ourselves, of course, when it comes to the NHS. It's reported that obesity treatment in the NHS has quadrupled in just the last decade. So those being treated for obesity-related conditions up fourfold in just 10 years. Now, we used to think that, alcohol and drugs and so on were one of the biggest problems facing the likes of A&E, but it seems that increasingly now the NHS is under pressure because people are too fat.
No, totally. And if you just remember a few years ago during the COVID pandemic, one of the biggest risk factors for being in critical care if you had COVID was actually being obese. And so the NHS does need to help tackle this. But I think you alluded to it in the introduction there. it's not about fixing the problem. Prevention is an important part of this as well. And
how do we do that? I mean, because, you know, there's lots said about educating the public and, you know, to live better. But I'm afraid some people just aren't willing to be educated, coerced or persuaded to live better. You know, and I guess with kind of 25 takeaways on every high street, microwave food and, you know, lazy eating being prevalent in the UK, there's not much chance, I think, of certain people, certain demographics in Britain, immediately changing lifestyle to save themselves and indeed to save the NHS. What do we do?
No, that is a very good point there, Russell, in terms of that. Obviously, the government are talking in terms of banning kind of junk food out of this, but that's not going to
make any difference. So it's a bit like Sadiq Khan deciding not to allow anything that contains sugar or salt to be an advert on TfL tube lines and bus stops. I mean, that's absolutely pointless, ridiculous, and, you know, will have no difference whatsoever, make no difference whatsoever when it comes to, again, certain types of people that are just going to act and behave in the way they do. I mean, we're kind of missing the point. I mean, do you think, for instance, is there argument in subsidising gym membership, for instance, making a healthy lifestyle more economically and financially attractive to the population? I mean, do we think that we should take prevention much more seriously than we do cure?
No, I think so. And talk about gym membership, there, one of the simplest things you can do actually to try and get a little bit fitter is just go walking. It's free. You can go outside and do that, you know, and that will help in terms of things. I think when you talk about education, maybe we just need a bit more education on the consequences of obesity, because people don't realise, obviously, until they're later in life, when they perhaps need that medical intervention at the NHS, of what the impact of obesity is. Yeah. Perhaps a bit more education around what the impacts will be in the future is a part of the solution to this.
The other thing that we should talk about, of course, just we've only got a minute or so left, but is the problem of strikes in the NHS really not helping outcomes, not helping treatment. News today in the Telegraph of a lady by the name of Susan Evans, who was 55, who died as a consequence, it seems, of neglect on the basis of her weight loss treatment, because she was misdiagnosed, or rather not diagnosed, at the time of industrial action by junior doctors. The coroner said that there was no specialist weight loss nurse on duty, and that Miss Evans was not seen by a senior doctor. She was discharged despite being extremely unwell, and died shortly afterwards. We've been talking on this channel, and I know this won't necessarily be your specific area of expertise, Jamie, but we have been talking a lot on this channel about those strikes back in the kind of spring, summer of last year, that those strikes by nurses and doctors would result in deaths, and it seems that definitely has been the case, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is a tragic story, obviously thoughts out to the family, and yeah, and this individual got discharged from hospital when the kind of the strikes were on, so there was a lack of care there, didn't see a doctor, and then I think 48 hours later was readmitted into hospital with complications from some surgery. So you talk about prevention and cure, that's an example there where having the right level of staffing in the NHS at the time may have resulted in this poor lady.
Well, it looks like it has. It looks like it has. OK, Jamie, many thanks indeed. Back after this break and the news with more about these terror attacks in the United States. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in on the far ball, slides it in. An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with
protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. Just gone midday. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'm here with you till 1 o'clock. Then I'll be handing over to Ian Collins for another 3 hours of this stuff. We're going to turn next to actually Philip Ingram, probably a compatriot of yours, Major General Chip Chapman, who's ex-head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, to talk about what's gone on in the United States overnight. Not one but two potential terror attacks, one in New Orleans and one in Las Vegas. So let's talk about that and see if there's any updates, albeit obviously that time zones notwithstanding, it's very, very early in the middle of the night in the United States. So although we have seen some press statements from the mayor, the head of police over there, and the FBI, I'm not sure we'll get anything else in terms of official update for a little while. But Major General Chip Chapman, thanks for joining me.
Good afternoon, Russell.
Good afternoon. I understand you might know my wingman for the afternoon, Philip Ingram.
I do indeed, Russell.
Hi, Chip. Good to see you.
Hello.
So we couldn't ask for, although the circumstances are obviously horrifying, we couldn't ask for two better guests to pontificate about what has happened. I'm not sure if there have been any updates, Chip, have they, over the last hour or so? I don't know if you know anything that perhaps we haven't already reported. Obviously, two incidents, one in Las Vegas outside a Trump hotel, which was a hired Cybertruck that blew up. Elon Musk, of course, has come out and stated that it is nothing to do with the vehicle itself in terms of its composition. I think that was perhaps the initial thought or fear, but indeed that it was laced with fireworks stroke a bomb in the load bed, according to Elon Musk, and other such combustibles. So obviously that has gone up, killing the driver and injuring many others. And almost at the same time, this horrifying scene in New Orleans, which is a seeming Muslim convert with an Islamist flag, an ISIS flag, on the truck that he drove into, revelers, killing 15 people. So, of course, the speculation, Chip, is that these are potentially linked. I presume that in your world and Philip's world, is there such thing as a coincidence in these instances?
I suspect that they're not linked. So the methodology is different for a kick-off, and the geography is different. Let me just explain those. So it used to be that we talked about a penetrative vehicle attack. That is what is now really called as vehicle as a weapon. That was the methodology in New Orleans. And the one in Las Vegas, it would be what we call a non-penetrative vehicle attack. That is, the vehicle itself is the weapon as the stationary thing. So the methodology is different. It looks like the name of the guy in Las Vegas has also been released, and people again are making a correlation that potentially they served at the same base. It looks completely different. The guy in Las Vegas looks like he was a Special Forces soldier for 19 years, completely different makeup than the chap in New Orleans in terms of, the ISIS flag and what looks like to be his social media output. So you have to be quite careful on these things of making a correlation between the two. What is probably going to be common between the two should the second one be a terrorist attack is, of course, they both had some sort of ideology. But in terms of how the Americans look at terrorism, they break it down absolutely clearly into domestic terrorism, and there's a lot of that around in terms of, you know, Antifa, white supremacist groups, including on Trump's watch with a lot of racially motivated attacks, which became the priority for the FBI in 2019. Pittsburgh and the Buffalo attacks were the two prime candidates for that in 2018, 2022. So I think this will actually be more of a coincidence at the moment. I can't see that they're linked. However, what the authorities will be trying to do, because there's two prime questions you ask after a first terrorist attack, is did this person act alone? Or was he part of a network? And is another attack coming?
And the FBI have been quite clear, I think, very, very early, that with regard to the New Orleans attack, that they don't believe that he acted on his own.
That's right. But what looks, again, slightly curious is if you look at the big four outside of air attacks, and I mean, you know, using hostages and planes a la 9/11, we really talk about vehicle as a weapon, bladed weapons, a long-barreled weapon, semi-automatic weapon attack, and explosives. And this, the one in New Orleans, looked to have three of those characteristics. Vehicle as a weapon, he had a long-barreled weapon, and there seemed to be explosives in the vehicle and may have been explosives around the town. Now, it's actually, apart from the execution of the road, this, if it was explosives, looks pretty incompetent there, because the things which really kill people are long-barreled weapons, automatic, and explosives. Vehicle as a weapon can kill lots of people, and indeed it was the attack in Nice in 2016.
The lorry attack,
is number 7 in the sort of European list of terrible attacks. All the others are really air attacks, you know, using an aircraft to come down and kill all the people on board, which is why we take aeroplanes very seriously in terms of cockpit security and airport security these days. So I don't think at the moment you can say that there is a correlation between these two attacks. We don't know the motivation on the first attack in terms of, yes, it is Islamist, but whether this was related to the globalization of the Intifada, for example, we don't know. That looks completely different to me from the one in Las Vegas.
Yeah, let me ask, in fact, Philip, let me ask you, bring you in. Do we think that, given particularly what Joe Biden, the President of the United States, has said with regard to FBI intelligence on the New Orleans attacker in particular, do we think there's been a failure of intelligence here?
It's very easy to label these things as failure of intelligence. Once an action has happened, you then have got a start point and you look back. And you've got 20/20 hindsight. What the intelligence organisations are trying to do is have 20/20 foresight and to keep us all protected. The FBI are very good indeed, but there are so many agencies across the United States, and the way they're organised, it's very difficult to get information around. We don't know when the New Orleans attacker published his stuff up online and how quickly that had been identified by the FBI as a threat.
Shamsuddin Bahajabar, the US national, and it's been emphasised that this perpetrator was a US national who'd served in the military. That he obviously was the vehicle had on it an ISIS flag, so of course there's an inference immediately that obviously this is Islamist, but also that in the hours, perhaps only hours, not days before the attack, he published several things on social media with regard to his intention to kill. Now, from your point of view, both of you actually being veterans of the security and intelligence communities, I suppose it is impractical for the authorities in whatever country to be able to track minute by minute all of the people on their lists, their watch lists. In fact, Philip, you and I were talking about this earlier on in terms of the resources that are needed to track everybody that might be on those lists for whatever reason. So would it be unfair to label this as a failure? You think so?
Yeah, very, very much so. You know, if you look at the UK alone, I don't have the statistics for the United States, but on our watch list, there's over 40,000 people. You know, active investigations today, 900 active investigations into about 3,000 people for terrorist-related activities today by Counter-Terror Police UK and the security services. We don't have enough police officers across the whole of the UK to keep all those people under surveillance. So you have to prioritise things. And the United States is an order of magnitude bigger. I don't know if Chip agrees with me on that.
Yeah, what I would say, of course, is that in terms of the security services and counter-terrorist command, there is a prioritisation grid. There always must be. Priority 1 Alpha is intelligence of attack planning. Now, what the difficulty really is that post-2017, with the attacks at sort of Westminster, London Bridge and Manchester, the MI5 in particular, but in terms of the CT Op Centre, etc., brought in a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning to go through what were previously closed subjects of interest, those outside of the 3,000 which Philip mentioned, and maybe part of the 48,000, whether the sort of divide between subjects of interest and closed subjects of interest has any relevance anymore is a moot point. The key thing about that is that the people who are not on it is because, or the attack planning sort of thing, is because the one thing that artificial intelligence cannot do is it's very bad at predicting social outcomes. So the needle in the haystack, when the needle decides to fall out of the haystack and pinprick someone, is very, very difficult to see, which is why the other thing which is slightly unusual at the moment is in the UK, if you had a complex plot with lots of people in, it is probably 99.999% certain that that plot will be discovered.
Yeah.
It is generally
because of the volume of people involved.
Yeah, and because there's normally some sort of leakage in some sort of area, and there'll be signs that will happen. That's why at the moment, because of being no arrests, it seems slightly odd at the moment with the fact there've been no IED explosions and all that sort of stuff. I would have expected by now, 24 hours later, some sort of denouement in terms of multiple arrests. So that seems slightly odd and aberrant at the moment.
So do you think it's odd that the FBI made the statement very, very early on, I mean, within an hour, I think, of the incident, that this perpetrator did not probably act alone? Do you think that was an unusual thing for them to come out with?
I do, actually. I think they've been far too forthcoming, because one of the other things we generally say is that 60% of initial reports are wrong, misleading, or inaccurate. The last thing you want to do is give that sort of inaccurate detail out. So I think some of the things that have been said will be proven to be inaccurate, where there's been a rush to get into the media, which is often the wrong thing to do in the counter-terrorist sphere, when you need to use considered evidence. Let me give you an example from last night. Now, it seemed that people were saying that the thing on the back of the truck was the IS flag. Now, having seen the pictures of that didn't look like a flag to me. It didn't also show the Shahida, the sort of white lettering which tells you about Allah being the sort of God and we all must worship.
But Chip, didn't it look as though it had been covered up by someone's jacket? It looked as though it had been covered up.
It could have been, but you couldn't go to that conclusion based on that evidence alone. And that's why this is often a jigsaw puzzle without clues, and you need to put all the clues together before you rush to conclusions.
But I guess the problem with that, of course, is that the public have a right to know and perhaps to be reassured, particularly if there are potentially other attacks in the offing. And obviously we know from the UK, in terms of, it seems a vacuum of knowledge and information, and indeed potentially some would say misinformation over certain instances, that of course the public demand to know, and perhaps also those individuals in power, dare I venture, particularly as per the FBI lead, the deputy, I think, that made an announcement very, very quickly after the New Orleans incident last night, that actually contradicted everybody else by saying that she didn't think that this was a terrorist incident. Now, maybe there's a bit of limelight, a limelight issue here, insofar as, yes, filling a void, filling a vacuum, but also people rushing to grab their 5 minutes of fame in front of the cameras at the lectern, and in doing so perhaps misspeak.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think there's two issues there. The public absolutely have a right to be reassured. The public don't have a right to know everything right from the off. They need to know in a timely fashion when those things are absolutely known. Not because a terrorist incident really goes through three phases. First one is called blimey, it's the Blitz. The second one, who did it and why, which we're still trying to unravel if you put both of these together. And the third one is, who can we blame? That's why you've already got this gone to this notion of, did the authorities make a bit of a balls up by not preempting this.
Well, and Chip, I mean, let me ask Philip, do you think also there's a political motivation here when Chip talks about wanting to blame or wanting to know who to blame, that there are certain factions within politics that want this to be Islamist, for instance, to prove a point?
I think politicians will jump on anything that they think will give them, a little edge over another politician, and it's not necessarily that. But adding to what Chip's been saying, from an intelligence perspective, the one thing that I found was the difference in psychology between the Americans and the British is the Americans would react to every bit of intelligence that came in from a source as a tipper. So you get something that comes in and says something is going to happen. They'd react immediately. We in the UK would recognise, as Chip said, that 60% of the time it was not going to be accurate, and we'd have a bit of soak time. And my soak time was to go and make a cup of tea if it wasn't that urgent. The Americans don't. They react to everything, and that's why we're probably getting some of the mismessaging coming out of the authorities.
OK, well, this will develop and run. Look, for now, Major General Chip Chapman, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, Colonel Philip Ingram. It's like the officers' mess here, isn't it? It's, wow. OK, we're going to take a break, and afterwards we're going to be talking about the climate and weather warnings in particular over the next 2 or 3 days. And I'm looking forward to this. My old friend Jim Dale, back after this.
Launched our kind of research this morning, highlighting 3 key important figures about what happened with Channel migrants. You're right, there's 151,136 arrived since 2018. That has led to £1 billion worth of profit to the people smugglers in that same period, just since 2018. And just for each year in total, it's cost us £15 billion.
Well, I think we should be concerned about the threat posed by Islamist terror attacks. We have seen a number of Islamist attacks over recent years happen on UK soil. Of course, many, many more have been foiled by counter-terrorism policing and the security services, besides those that have tragically taken place. So I think all of us should do everything we can to support CT policing and the security services.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk. It is 12:20. I'm here till 1 o'clock. I'm Russell Quirk. We're now going to talk about weather, because it's that time of year where weather happens. It gets a bit colder, gets a bit windier. Sometimes we see a bit of snow, but to some it seems that it's a bit of a surprise, actually, particularly to our travel and rail companies. But joining me to talk about this now, and I'm going to try and keep calm, because the last time we spoke, it did kick off a little bit, but I do like him really, even though I disagree with just about everything he says. It is the wonderful, the brilliant author of Whether or Not, Jim Dale.
Good afternoon, Russell.
Jim, how are you?
I'm good. I'm actually quite warm with the sun on my back. So
that must be climate change. Must be climate change.
Oh no! Don't go down to that. Was yesterday with the floods in the northwest.
But it looks very sunny there. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in High Wycombe at the moment. Not too far from where you are, to be honest with you. But it is a really nice day if you're not in northern Scotland, where sweet and bittersweet. If you like the snow, then you love it. If you don't, then you don't. But up there in the far north, it is lots of snow showers up there, and they will continue, to be honest. They've got big problems, actually.
So we've seen a real change in the weather, Jim, haven't we, over the last kind of 24, 48 hours? It was actually quite mild previously, but it seems that automatically, as we now get into January, which I guess is is it the depths of midwinter, seasonally, technically?
Yeah, January, February normally is it. What caused it? The cold front that caused the problems in the northwest yesterday, particularly. That was slow moving. That's your division between polar air, which we're now all in, and temperate air, which we were in. So we switched. It's not abnormal to see these kind of switches at this time of year. It's about time we saw a little bit of winter, and hey presto, here it comes. With a lot
some of us look forward to it, actually, the cold weather. I quite like it, really. It's kind of bracing, isn't it? So talk to us about some of the temperatures that people can expect across the country. So how cold does it get, from the tip of Scotland all the way down to, let's say, the likes of Land's End?
Yeah, well, good point, actually, because down there, it is, I'm going to say balmy. It's not quite balmy, but it's actually relatively mild. We're looking at 8s, 9s and 10s at the moment, whereas if you go to the Highlands of Scotland, you're hovering around the freezing, if not colder. Now, I'll just say this to you: in this next week, as we go through the week, those same Highlands, the Glens, etc., Grampians, Highlands, -10, -15 quite comfortably. Other parts of England and Wales, -5, 6s and 7s. There's no problem with that whatsoever. We're in winter's grip.
And is that normal, Jim?
Yeah, it is. I think it is. When you get into a polar airstream with the polar front, which is what's the division, anything goes. And we've seen lower temperatures in the past, but they're critically low in terms of burst pipes, etc. when you get the thaw. So you've got to watch out for that one as things. And I say as things warm up, but not yet. I've got to give you the story of what's happening this weekend, if you're not going to already ask me, because it is important.
Yeah, sure.
So this weekend. Not Saturday morning, that'll be a cold morning everywhere, cold and frosty and icy. The afternoon from the southwest, so initially some snow over the high ground of Exmoor, Dartmoor. All of that will start moving across northeastwards into England and Wales. Copious amounts of snow, maybe even London to start with, or I think what will happen there in those southern counties, it will quite readily turn to rain. But further north, I'm going to say the Midlands, maybe even where I am, lots and lots of snow. There's going to be real problems on Saturday afternoon stroke evening into Sunday as well, up to southern Scotland. So it's probably 3/4 of the country that's going to get snowbound. So whether you like it or whether you don't like it, I'm sure there's plenty of people listening who want the snow. It's coming, and you're going to have to watch yourself, particularly if you're travelling on there you go, there's some nice pictures.
And how long is it going to snow for? A day, 2 days?
I would think 24, 36 hours. It will come up, and what will happen, that milder air will push up, but it's, as I say, it's going into cold air. It'll push back again. The cold air will push back. And I'll just say this to you, Russell. I don't think we're going very far very quickly as far as the cold weather's concerned this side of mid-month. So you can prepare for much more of this going forward.
So you think it's here to stay for a good 2 or 3 weeks, as in cold temperatures, more snow?
I think it is.
And of course, we are famously unable to cope when it comes to infrastructure, aren't we? When it comes to rail travel, airports and roads. So can we expect disruption?
Well, yes, we can. And one of the reasons we don't cope is people don't take the education on as far as what to do in these types of weather. What happens, if you like. We sort of almost go into it blindly. That's why I wrote that book, Whether or Not. it's all in there, what the weather can do, left, right and centre, what it actually does for us. So your habits today will have changed from yesterday in terms of how you're feeling, what you're eating, what you're wearing, where you're going. All of this changes. So just be set for a winter mode now for the next fortnight and you'll do pretty well in it.
So I'll say this with my tongue in my cheek. If it's getting cold like it does every winter, there's clearly no such thing as climate change.
No. What you're talking about there, Russell, is pure weather. The weather changes. The sun disappears, or the angle of the sun disappears over the equator. It's moving on its way back now, but we've got this legacy. So look, weather is weather, climate is climate. We've seen changes in the climate. We know 2024 was the hottest year in human history.
Well, hang on, human history? That only goes back about 100,000 years, isn't it?
So that's enough, isn't it? I mean,
well, not when the planet's billions of years old. No, because obviously it doesn't account for what happened 500,000 years ago or 2 million years ago.
It's the human bit and the ecosystems bit that actually counts, because we're here now, not when the dinosaurs were alive, or even when. But
in human terms, in data terms, it's a bit like judging a movie on kind of the last 5 minutes.
Not really, because you can see very graphically on the graphs the actual spikes that are occurring simply because of more record fossil fuels emissions going into the atmosphere. You can actually see all these.
But that's contested, Jim. That's contested by an equal number of scientists to those that you were subscribed to that say that car engines and boilers are boiling the nation, boiling the globe.
You find yourself in a diminishing small band. I'll just say this: I would challenge any, and we've got five MPs who are denialists in the House of Commons and their chairman.
Would you be referring to reform by any chance?
Yeah. Well,
I think you'll find there might be more than 5 MPs out of 650 that don't necessarily subscribe to the climate extremism that you and others do.
Yeah. OK, well, no, I think the extremism on the other side, but I'll challenge any one of those MPs or their chairman to come and talk with me and debate the nuances of climate change. Man-made climate change is what they denied. They don't deny climate change per se. Man-made climate change. I know the reasons, but we'll I'll give that to your producers and say, arrange it. I'll get on there with Richard Tice or Nigel Farage or any of them who wish to come on, and we can have a discussion. You can be the chairman, no problem whatsoever.
I think done. I'd love to do. I mean, I'm not sure I could be an impartial chairman because, I'm also one of common sense that doesn't believe that the hype from the likes of Dale Vince and Ed Miliband and others is warranted insofar as this whole thing around fossil fuels equals carbon dioxide equals heat, because there are many that think it's the other way around, that actually that carbon follows heat, and that the world is simply warming as it always does every few 100,000 years. And in fact, the science that I listen to and subscribe to shows that the globe has always warmed. There's always been carbon dioxide. In fact, in history, there's generally been more carbon dioxide on the planet than there is now.
Yeah, but we weren't there, and that's
exactly
the point. Look,
so how did the climate warm if we weren't here?
It warmed through CO2 in exactly the same way.
But we didn't. Yeah, but it was being produced by who then? By who? Because we weren't here.
And angles of the sun, etc. There's lots of dimensions that come into this, and you've got to think. You've got to remember, it only takes a 1.5 degrees, which is where we are now, to put people into problems when you get the extremes of heat, because that means an extra 10 degrees on the surface. I'll just say this to you: you could walk in a classroom, a first school classroom. Ask the children there whether they believe in climate change. What's around them?
Of course they will, because they've been indoctrinated by the faculty, haven't they?
No, they haven't.
The same as the civil service, the same as the NHS. Everyone's been indoctrinated by this myth. By the way, Jim, hang on, before we go, so we've got to go to a break. I have actually bought your book, Surviving Extreme Weather.
Well done.
Well, I haven't read it yet, so maybe you can. Well, yeah, I'll read it and then we can have a debate about it. But no, I bought it just to show balance. I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
Is it a comedy novel? Is it a work of fiction, or is it real?
Hardly. There's a few laughs in there.
Go on, such as
in there, but most of it is meant to help people and put them into a place of safety when the proverbial hits the fan. Let me just say that. Okay.
I guess, and I would say this, when China, India and the United States that are responsible for 80% of carbon emissions, when they rein it in, maybe we can take it seriously. But until then, as we talked about earlier on, actually, you should have been on the EV segment where we talk about electric vehicles and their pointless deployment, their pointless construction. There is absolutely no point us in Britain doing anything whilst the rest of the world chugs fossil fuels and carbon into the Earth's atmosphere.
We do our bit. We do our bit, Russell.
Do our bit. Our 1%. Yeah, it'll make all the difference once that's eradicated. Jim, love you to bits. Really good to speak to you. And I'm sure we'll speak again soon, mate. All right, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. That was Jim Dale. That wasn't too bad, was it? Yeah, I think I behaved myself. Look, I can show restraint. There you go, bosses. Russell Quirk, back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk here for another half an hour or so, then handing over to Ian Collins, who will be with you between 1 and 4. Let's talk about the police now, shall we? And the fact that, again, no disrespect to the rank and file, I bear them no malice. I'm sure they're trying to do a good job, despite the fact that it appears senior police officers are rather getting in the way of that. So let's talk about our lack of faith in the police in terms of their ability to turn up, their ability to investigate crime, detection rates, and so on. Let's talk to Harry Tanier now, who is a former police sergeant and a friend of the station. Harry, good afternoon and welcome.
Hello, Russell. How are you? I enjoyed your last segment immensely. You kept control remarkably well.
I know. I'm expecting a gold star at the end of this from the bosses, because I think the last time I was on with Jim Dale, and I generally do like him, maybe just because of the comedy factor, but yes, I had a bit of a ding-dong with him, I think it's fair to say. We don't agree on much. But anyway, I think one thing you and I will agree on, though, is the woeful state of Britain's policing. Now, I don't know how long you've been out of the job, number of years?
Yeah, it was April 2020.
Okay, it's only 4 years. I mean, it seems to have got worse and worse by the year. If we look at just the data, the statistics, I mean, today has been reported that police are abandoning 4 unsolved crimes every minute. That's the statistic raised into 2024. Detection rates, of course, have fallen, particularly when it comes to very serious crimes like rape and sexual offences. So that's not great. So crime is increasing. constantly we seem to not see police on the streets, and I know it's a contentious, debatable point as to whether seeing police on the street is in some way a deterrent. I think it is. I certainly would like to see more police wandering around on the beat like they used to in the old days. But the consequence, and maybe the consequence as a result of lots of other things when it comes to policing, is that, yes, crime is increasing, detection rates are reducing, and it looks like the police themselves are abandoning unsolved cases at a higher rate than ever before. What on earth is going wrong with the police service, Harry?
Excuse me. I mean, there is so much involved, isn't there? And when you look at, OK, so they failed to identify half of robberies, to identify suspects in half robberies, over half of criminal damage and arson, 7 out of 10 thefts and burglaries. But then, OK, so we dig into the burglaries, for example, and you've got 3/4 of those burglaries are not solved. But when you look over a 3-month period, there's 120,000 burglaries. So that's an awful lot of hours of police work. So then you think, well, 25% was solved. That's not so bad after all. However, when you get to the sexual crimes and the murders, you consider there are fewer murders than burglaries, of course. So a smaller adjustment in figures has just as big a adjustment on the percentages. So the devil's in the detail there. However, OK, so we look at the detail. Yes, I was in London for a couple of days. In December, I didn't see any police officers walking the street. That's no fault of theirs, OK? I wasn't in Leicester Square, but I was in Covent Garden. I lied. I did see 2 police officers there. I think that was during my whole time there.
So, Harry, where are they? We're now up to 147,000 police officers again. So, famously, Theresa May cut our police service, our police force, as I think it should be called, by 20,000 in number. We're now back up to about 147,000. And yes, the population's grown, of course, as it is by 700,000 to 800,000 people every year, thanks to net migration. But where are the police? If we've got the same number now that we had 10 years ago, I mean, where are they? Because you don't see them unless they're attending an incident on their blue lights. Where are they?
You're quite right. And you've got what's changed in the last sort of 10 years. Yes, you had Theresa May's, the Police Federation, famous speech that you're just crying wolf when you say this is going to be a disaster by us getting more out of less. Because we, as police officers, knew how strapped we were at that time. And every year since, the complexity of crime grows. You've got cybercrime, you've got online fraud that never existed before. You've got media that are clickbait. We used to call them the mainstream media. Of course, they're legacy media now because they don't tend to be the mainstream so much. So the public opinion, and you were just saying before about our education system with young people coming through the schools being indoctrinated, sort of similar, really, where if the only influence you're getting is from biased media posts, then fewer people are going to come forward as witnesses, fewer people are going to come forward to report crimes maybe as well. But then you've got prioritising by our more political bosses. You've got some cracking bosses, but when you consider you've got more than 10% of our chief constables, I believe, at the moment are suspended from duty. But you've got a leadership problem who I think are more politicians than police officers who regularly throw their staff under the bus. So they're frightened to actually do proactive policing.
Well, and those senior police officers, Harry, seem to be in place just because of the grading or the grandiose nature of their degree. You know, whether they went to Oxford, whether they got a master's degree. I mean, it seems that that the police service changed when the senior officers stopped being good old-fashioned coppers that understood how criminals think and went out to try and arrest them, and instead started thinking more about the academic nature of the senior police officers that are in charge of the rank and file. I mean, that seems to be one of the reasons I think that things have changed. Yes, exactly. A huge amount of influence was put on education and degrees, and we've got to get everyone a degree as they go through. The stress that I've got a Twitter account or X account, which I thought would plummet when I left the police. It got much larger because of police officers speak to me, so I get a good idea of what's going around the force. And it is exhausting, especially if you're not single joining the police. If you're married and you're dealing with everyday life and you're having to do all this
this thesis and for 3 years of utter hell and be policing, but they say, oh, no, you've got time committed to do your work. Well, when your colleagues are rushing out the door, going to emergencies that are half an hour late, you can't still do your little thesis.
Well, let's look at some of the numbers, Harry, shall we? So whatever has gone wrong with the police, I think it's fair to say that something or some things have gone catastrophically wrong, whether it's presence, whether it's apathy, whether it's the motivations, the goals and the incentives by way of the senior police officers in charge. Let's just have a look. So recorded crime is now at 8.8 million offences a year. The crime survey by the Office of National Statistics, and of course there's actual data, and then there's the crime survey, and there's always an argument about which one of those is most relevant. You can argue that the crime data, the numbers of reported incidents, don't actually reflect the number of incidents, because most people now, or many people, don't report. The crime survey, you could argue, over-eggs the numbers. However, what the latest ONS crime survey numbers show is that crime experienced by individuals and households, which I think is the most important type of crime, increased in 2023-24 by 10%. Robbery, violence with injury and fraud increased notably in the 12 months up to June 2024, returning to pre-pandemic levels. Robbery hit an estimated 139,000 incidents compared with 60,000 the previous year. That increase is absolutely appalling. Robbery, 139,000 incidents compared with 60,000 the previous year. Violence with injury rose to 562,000 incidents, up from 376,000. Theft up 20%. And here's a really abhorrent statistic for us all. The charge rate for rape is just 2.7%. The police have lost control of Britain, Harry.
Okay, so first of all, I've always said with the rape side of things is one of the worst one of the worst offences anyone could ever witness or be a victim of, without a shadow of a doubt. But the issue we have with rape is one of those crimes which is very rarely witnessed by others. So you're going to get quite a low conviction rate, unless it's sort of a stranger rate, that side of things. But it's dropped
significantly over the last 5 or 10 years. It was 7%, it's now 2.7%.
Yeah, it is alarming. And I think overall, the knock-on effect of having such a reduction so quickly in the Theresa May days has meant, yes, we've got police resources back up to level, but there are no way are they of the experience that the officers were before. And of course, you've got all the technology changes and all that, and our technology is behind. So it's a real group effect that is actually causing such a devastating effect on our crime. Prevention is everything. Neighbourhood policing, yes, I was an armed response officer and I was a road death investigation specialist. But if you want to get your crimes down, it's neighbourhood policing. But the first thing to be taken off line on neighbourhood policing, because if you've got fires going off everywhere...
police officers, or this fixation with community support officers? And no disrespect to PCSOs, they have a place, but they are not a proper substitute, in my opinion, because they are recruited to a lower standard, let's be honest, and they don't have the power of arrest. So are you talking about neighbourhood policing as in proper coppers?
Yeah, yes, I am, but also with PCSOs, you've got varying degrees of effectiveness all over the country. Yes, I do think when I see 2 PCSOs walking down the street, you need 2, but then that's double the wage of 1 PCSO. If they're in an area where they are literally just get people... But if you walk the streets, people will come up to you and say, Jimmy Bloggs is up to this down the road or whatever. They would never have walked into a police station to report that.
So it becomes intelligence gathering by the very nature of them walking around.
Exactly. And you're going back to the old days of the old copper walking round, and they knew everyone and they knew who was up to things. We still did that roughly. In 2020, we knew who our criminals were. We knew on the briefing when somebody, when Burgling Bill was coming out of prison that week, that we knew our crimes were going to go up in the burglary. So we would put emphasis on that and get him in prison as quickly as possible again, because
Harry, a very interesting
never going to stop.
Let me just bring Philip Ingram in, because of course his background is very much intelligence. You subscribe to this?
I do very much so, but I think there are other wider problems, again, with the police force. It's, police and crown commissioners are political appointees. They're voted
useless,
in.
hopeless, but a waste of time.
But they set the priorities for the chief constable. The chief constable then puts those into operational priorities. So we're immediately politicising the priorities that the chief constable's got, because otherwise the police and crown commissioner will get rid of him or her out of their job. And then we've got the political correctness that's coming in, that's disabling good old-fashioned policing, because a lot of police officers, if they go in and they do something that could be perceived as anti one particular grouping, they can be disciplined for it. And it doesn't help whenever we see police cars painted in rainbow colours.
No, or dancing the Macarena as they do at the Notting Hill Carnival. Philip, thank you very much. Harry Tanguy, thank you very much indeed as ever. Former police sergeant, always wise and insightful words. We're going to take a break. I'm here for the next 15 minutes. Then Ian Collins. I'm Russell Quirk.
Well, my response to all these events is to wait and to discover much more about them than we could possibly know at this stage. To rule nothing out, of course, it is perfectly possible that the events are linked and that there is some terrorist element, but it's also possible that they're not, and that there might be some other reason involved. I am very reluctant to get involved in any speculation about what this is about until we know a great deal more about the perpetrators and about the background.
We launched our kind of research this morning, highlighting three key important figures about what happened with Channel migrants. You're right, there's 151,136 arrived since 2018. That has led to £1 billion worth of profit to the people smugglers in that same period, just since 2018. And just for each year in total, it's cost us £15 billion.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Thank you for your company over the last nearly 3 hours or so. Lots of calls, some of which we've managed to take, and lots of texts. Thank you. I've been joined by Philip Ingram, who's been brilliant, so thank you to Philip. So we've got the just the last 10 minutes or so, and we thought we'd end on this note. Talking of the police, perhaps it is no wonder that the police aren't around, they don't solve crimes, and they don't fulfil their duties as perhaps they once might have done, because they're too busy being politically correct, or rather overtly political correct. This is a story in the Times that says and I kid you not, this is not April the 1st, this is definitely not an April Fool, this is true. Trans police can now hold multiple warrant cards for different genders. I'll just read that again. Trans police can hold multiple warrant cards for different genders. And so it's not just that you, as a man that wants to be a woman and therefore is a trans woman, can hold both a male warrant card by way of your biological sex and also a female warrant card because you have decided to somehow identify as a woman. It gets even more ridiculous because, of course, there are those that say that they are not just gender fluid, but subscribe to perhaps many of multiple genders. I think the perceived wisdom by the lunatics that believe this guff is that there can be up to 500 different genders. Believe me, that is not me that thinks that. I'm very simplistic and very old-fashioned in that I believe, because it's true, that there are two, male and female. Identify as what you like, don't impose it upon us though. Look, let's talk about this nonsense to Connie Shaw, this ridiculous edict that 11 police forces in England and Wales have said, and this is a result of a Freedom of Information request, that trans officers can have multiple warrant cards. Is it any wonder that our police are rubbish, Connie?
Well, yes, it's not any wonder. So the Daily Mail has revealed that 1 in 4 police forces now allow trans-identified male police officers to strip search female suspects. And this is the reality when we're talking about the cards that people can hold that say they're a certain gender. The danger here is that we now are giving the right to male police officers who say that they're women to not only access female spaces within staff quarters, including changing rooms and showers, but search female suspects. And this flies in the face of the in the face of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, which states that searches involving the removal of more than outer clothing are required to be conducted by and only in the presence of officers or staff members of the same sex as the suspect and out of public view. And when we talk about intimate searches, we're not just talking about removing clothing, we are talking about genital inspections. So when the case of Child Q, who was the 15-year-old schoolgirl who was wrongly accused of possessing drugs, she was made to bend over to have her genitals inspected. They are the sort of searches that male police officers who say that they are women are now being given the right to carry out. And this story that the Daily Mail has revealed in the last couple of days has actually been going on for a lot longer. So this policy was actually introduced in December 2021, and it was the Women's Rights Network who brought this to the public sphere in early 2022 and subsequently published a report in January 2024 after which the government said that they would suspend these policies and that they needed to be revised.
So this is something though, Connie, that seemingly individual police forces can decide for themselves rather than there being a national legislative diktat. So any police force, which is why, I mean, most of them, it seems, 2/3 of police forces are allowing male officers and civilian staff to identify as women and also not just to perform those cavity searches completely inappropriately, but also to use women's showers, toilets and change rooms. That seems to be just at the behest of each individual police force. So if you get someone at the top of that police force, a chief constable or a police and crime commissioner that is particularly woke and determined to advance their own political ideology, however warped it is, then the whole force has to step into line.
Mm-hmm. And in the policy that the National Police Chief Council introduced, there's actually reference to disciplinary action that can be taken against officers who speak out against this. So Kathy Larkman, who is the National Policing Lead for the Women's Rights Network, who led this report, she served as a police officer for 31 years. She knows firsthand how captured the police force is and what it's like to be a female police officer, worried about the potential of you losing your job if you speak out against this. I mean, you would have thought that the country would have learnt its lesson after the awful murder of Sarah Everard, where we learnt the hard way the extent to which males or men will go to exploit their positions of authority. And now the state is not only going back on their word about regaining the trust of women in policing, but it now are offering state-sanctioned sexual assault. I mean, something that's even more sinister about this whole policy is that in November, the Ministry of Justice published figures that says that 62% of men who identify as women in prison have been convicted of at least one sexual offence.
Yeah, now, I was just talking to Philip Ingram about that. I mean, what an abhorrent statistic.
Yes, and so we already know that. So we already know that men are using this loophole to identify as women to access female spaces. And now the actual police force are allowing men to take advantage of this.
So in the pursuit of political correctness and wokeism, we are putting women and girls in danger.
Yes, I mean, perhaps what is the most disturbing aspect is that this policy was put in place to attract more transgender individuals to join the police force.
But why? They only make up 0.5% of the UK population. Why would there be such a drive in the UK to recruit from a pool that is so small?
I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, the police have admitted that the policy of allowing males who say they're females to search intimately female suspects has been put in place to attract more transgender people to the police force. I mean, you can't get much sicker than that.
Let me just underline this. This is a small list of just some of the forces that advocate this nonsense. Forces which allow male staff who identify as female to use women's facilities, for instance, include Thames Valley, Essex, that's my force, well, not mine, but the force in which I'm ashamed to live, frankly, Leicestershire, Avon and Somerset, Powys, Merseyside and Police Scotland. Thames Valley allows officers to carry multiple warrant cards, as do others, including Norfolk, Cheshire and Leicestershire. Others, such as Bedfordshire and Essex, allow 2 warrant cards to be held, one presumably male and female. I guess that's progress, isn't it? The fact that you don't, they're not encouraging you to hold 500 if you believe that you're of multiple gender. Essex Police Force's policy states that during early transition there may be a need to have 2 warrant cards so that on any off-duty incidents do not result in the staff member having to out themselves. I mean, this is not just nonsense, this is dangerous, sinister stuff. And by the way, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Essex is supposed to be a Conservative, Roger Hurst. He's already under fire for the way that his force treated Alison Pearson recently. And his force, by the way, Roger, is failing when it comes to increase in crime and also lack of detection, failing on all measures. You'd think that police forces would be more focused on what is right, correct and proper when it comes to policing rather than this woke nonsense.
Yes, you would, and especially you'd expect Conservative leaders to be opposed to this, but we have to remember it was the Conservative Party who were trying, Theresa May in particular, who were trying to push self-ID, which would mean that it was just by extremely easy for anyone to change their legal sex. This was a Conservative policy, and perhaps if it wasn't for Brexit and other legislative priorities, that self-ID probably would have been passed in the UK.
Well, Connie, that's why they're no longer in power. Connie Shaw, thank you very much indeed. Wise words, yes, always insightful. Talking of wise words, apparently Ian Collins coming up. Are you going to have any wise words for us?
I might speak to somebody with wise words. I don't know if they're going to come
Get that frog out your throat first.
Yeah, I don't know where that appeared from.
Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year, Russell. It's interesting what you were just talking about there. Do you know when you read a story and you think, I better reread that?
It's a parody. It looks like it's a parody.
It's like, this is something that Armando...
It's almost like having a deck of playing cards as a police officer, and it's all, who am I going to identify as today? My kids that go to a particularly interesting grammar school say that they've got a couple of kids in their year that identify as cats.